It cannot be that members take their time to appear and look forward to interacting with members of cabinet who, up to a few minutes before their appearance, ambush the speaker with letters for one reason or the other, unless somebody is indisposed, like the CS for Health was this week. That one you can understand. Everybody is a human being. You can fall sick. But the rest, Mr. Speaker, I don't think that is agreeable. And therefore, I'd be proposing to the SBC that perhaps if members of Secretariat will do with your help and that of the other leaders, we are more than glad to draft that letter together so that Cabinet can appreciate the importance of this session. There are various bills, Mr. Speaker, that are at the Committee of the Whole, which include the Street Vendors, Local Content Bill, Early Childhood, Land Amendment Bill, Cooperatives, Mr. Speaker, which I hope we can conclude on. There are various motions as well that are before our committees, which I do hope that we can conclude on. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, on Thursday, the 21st of November, 2024, His Excellency, the President, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, will be making the State of the Nation address to both houses of Parliament in accordance with Article 132(1)(b) of the Constitution. I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, you shall be communicating as usual to guide us on the necessary procedures and arrangements made for our attendance in the National Assembly chamber of this annual exercise, and looking forward to hear on what is the state of the nation and the concerns that citizens have, and also a report card to Parliament as a tool of accountability, Mr. Speaker, to share what his administration has achieved so far. I hereby thank you and lay this statement on the table of the Senate. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Next order. Yes.
Mr. Speaker, if you remember, there's a request I made that if there is any member of a mediation committee, perhaps if you can permit them, it will be important for the House to know. That's an extremely important issue.
Yeah, but they have to express the desire to inform the House. I'm not. Do you have any information that will aid the House?
Very good information.
Okay, proceed, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir, we had our first meeting of the Mediation Committee on Thursday last week. And we had a morning session which was very acrimonious because the members of the National Assembly were of the opinion that we could not discuss DORA before the RMLF cases that have been filed in court are withdrawn. So we argued here for about 2 hours, and we adjourned for lunch. When we came back, we were able to agree on a raft of issues that could be considered pending resolution of the mediation. Mr. Speaker, sir, the meeting that was then adjourned to Tuesday at 10 a.m. And again, we met on Tuesday. However, the members of the National Assembly were still of the firm opinion that we cannot discuss anything until the RMLF issue is resolved. On our part, led by our chair, Senator Roba, we informed the members that National Assembly that the case that has been filed is not in our hands. Neither do we have any leverage or control over the Council of Governors. So issues arose as to whether we can amend DORA or we can amend the Appropriation Act, and also the fact that His Excellency the President had sent a memorandum to both houses of Parliament on the issue of CARA, because in the memorandum sent to the House, the President is speaking of 380 billion going to the counties. And already we had passed DORA with $400.1 billion, shillings for DORA. And our legal counsel advised the committee that DORA is the beginning of all the financial instruments that are made every year. So if any legislation is against DORA, it means that legislation is null and void. So far we are at a stalemate because the members were of the opinion that if we are not going to resolve RMLF, they are not going to, even if we agree at the mediation committee, they are not going to implement that or accede to that agreement in their house. So the meeting adjourned without any specific date for the next meeting so that members could consult. The National Assembly could consult and the Senate also could consult so that we can get a way forward over this legislation. The way things are, Mr. Speaker, sir, most of the counties are suffering. Most of the counties are suffering, and many have been unable to pay salaries, while others have resorted to short-term loans from their bankers, and this will also add to the cost of doing business in those counties. So the earlier, Mr. Speaker, sir, we are able to resolve this stalemate, and I will implore you to maybe speak to your counterpart so that maybe the positions that have been taken by the other house could be able to soften. We are ready to sit down on the issue of quantum, or whether we could reduce the 400.1 billion to a figure that is acceptable to the National Assembly, but they said no, we cannot discuss the issue of quantum before we resolve the road maintenance levy case that is in the courts. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Thank you. Yes, Senator Fernandi.
Mr. Speaker, I raise understanding order number one, that there are two issues, the issue of mediation and the issue of university funding model. If you can give us maybe 15 minutes to ventilate on it.
We are not going to discuss the progressive report that we've just been given by Senator Faki.
Then we can do the university model by the chair.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me be the first to have the bite on the cherry. One is I want to support the statement by Senator Wakoli on the issue of Bungoma employees, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, most of the audit reports that come to the Senate, almost all counties are beyond 35%, Mr. Speaker, in their fiscal responsibility. In fact, you have been a governor. You will notice that most counties, they are going beyond 35% in terms of employees' compensation, Mr. Speaker. This crisis is also in Nandi. Mr. Speaker, even yesterday when the Nandi County Assembly tabled a report on ad hoc, one of the issues, Mr. Speaker, and the crisis that we are facing is on the issue of employees, where even the current sitting governor has employed his close relatives, among other individuals, Mr. Speaker, coupling a lot of money, Mr. Speaker, which continues to be very unfortunate, Mr. Speaker. And this report has been underscored by the Public Service Commission, which did an audit, HR audit on human resource in Nandi County, Mr. Speaker. So it is very unfortunate that most counties are struggling with this, especially in non-payment, Mr. Speaker, of statutory deductions, where counties are not giving maybe pension, Mr. Speaker, for their employees, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, this issue we have in Nandi, Mr. Speaker, and I hope with time we can be able to address, Mr. Speaker, because even in Bungoma and Nandi, we have similar issues going into the future, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on the issue of university funding model, I want to thank the President by, after you and cry, he decided to form a committee or a commission to look into it, the Presidential Working Party on Education, Mr. Speaker. But I in my own opinion, Mr. Speaker, there are many challenges. I think some of us who use Higher Education's loan board, there are many tools that you can use to fund the education. Mr. Speaker, my proposal is that, and I want to thank the Chair of Education, Senator Joe Nyutu, that we need to have only Band 1 and Band 2, where Band 1 will be the people who are vulnerable, and there are many yardsticks. You can use nyumba wazee wa mitaa, you can use the priest or the sheikh, Mr. Speaker, you can use many yardsticks to give them on band 1 and band 2, Mr. Speaker, should be parents who are able, but they cannot be able to finance the education, Mr. Speaker. And even, Mr. Speaker, we need to widen. Remember, you being the senior lawyer in this country, the students who go to Kenya School of Law are not able to access the loans from Higher Education's Loan Board. And I know Senior Counsel Senator Okongo Mugeni is aware of this. Even, Mr. Speaker, the teachers who undergo teachers training program cannot access the funding through, Mr. Speaker. So this university funding model will ensure that the university education is well covered, Mr. Speaker, will ensure that Kenya, the one and tertiary colleges, Mr. Speaker, so that it becomes easy in this funding model, Mr. Speaker. I think we need to agree as a country that let us sit and resolve the issue of university funding model with being student-centered.
1 minute to go, Senator, 1 minute to go.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ensure that it is student-centered funding, Mr. Speaker, going into the future. So I want to ask the Senate committee, although, Mr. Speaker, we receive a bashing from National Assembly that we should not be discussing such matters. But I thought everything concerns counties, Mr. Speaker, because these students you are talking about come from counties. So, Mr. Speaker, I think the National Assembly should get busy ama waende wasikie vibaya na huko kwao. Asante sana, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Speaker, I rise to comment on the university funding model. It is also fortunate that the Education Committee just took us to a very engaging sensitization with the SDG caucus. And the focus, Honorable Speaker, was purely on what we are discussing now. We are very convinced that the Education Committee will be able to tackle some of the challenges. But, Honorable Speaker, the university funding model has real challenges out there. I remember I was sharing with the Education Committee, and all of us agreed that there are challenges that we must face as a country. Honorable Speaker, even as we sit here, in the universities, Honorable Speaker, was with some university students yesterday, and a number of our university students are not at their residential places at the university. The hostels are free, are vacant. Honorable Speaker, because not that the university students are not able to use them, but our students are not able to afford the payment of the hostels, the payment of their food, and at the same time, Honorable Speaker, pay for the fee as is structured in the funding model. But Honorable Speaker, what is the main objective of us taking children to school? And Honorable Speaker, it is also worth noticing that not all bright students that get to the university come from able families. Honorable Speaker, a number of our people will not be able to afford university education with the new university funding model, and so it must be attended to. And secondly, Honorable Speaker, I must also mention the challenges that we are having with the junior secondary education, Honorable Speaker. Right now, there is a rush to put up classrooms where grade 9 is going to go to, Honorable Speaker. But it is done in a rush. As a country, are we saying we are not able to plan for our children? That as they grow from one level to the next, as a country, we are not able to plan for them so that we do things in a rush. Honorable Speaker, we'll also repeat the same issue I've always repeated here, that GSS is not being handled properly, Honorable Speaker. There are no adequate teachers to handle the 9 teaching subjects in our schools. A majority of the schools are having a maximum of 4 subjects being covered against 9 subjects. Honorable Speaker, how will our candidates in the future compete with other candidates in the region and internationally? Honorable Speaker, the challenges in GSS must be addressed. I support.
Senator Gloria Oroba.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like
Senator, you have 3 minutes.
I'd like to add my voice on the university funding model, Mr. Speaker, particularly on the issue of determining the level of need, Mr. Speaker. This has caused a lot of conflict because there has been an approach that most households are considering it not fair. So, Mr. Speaker, I urge that we clean up this process. On the issue of the TVET, Mr. Speaker, if you look at how the discrepancy has been put on the funding model, the TVET is undermined, Mr. Speaker, and yet we have been pushing for the TVET institutions in terms of ensuring that our youth are being plugged into entrepreneurial skills and things like that, which are mostly on the TVET, Mr. Speaker. However, when you look at how the funding model is put together, it is actually discriminating against those students who are going to the TVET, Mr. Speaker. And I want to place emphasis, because if you look at what is happening now with the new institutions that we put in place, the Kenya National Qualification, the one that recognizes prior learning, Mr. Speaker, it's actually pushing on the TVET industry. Yet, when you look at the funding model, they are cutting out the TVET students, Mr. Speaker. Otherwise, I would say that the issue of how they determine the students' level of need, that is a big conversation, and I think that if we focus on having a fair matrix, then we won't have all the noise that is there in terms of determining who qualifies and who doesn't qualify for the funding model. Thank you.
Senator Mogene.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, for purposes of record, I wanted to alert Senator Fonandi, Senator Cheragei, that Higher Education Loans Board extends loans to students at the Kenya School of Law, beginning the year 2024-2025. Mr. Speaker, I wanted that to go on record so that people in Nandi are not misled. Yes, there's already an agreement between Higher Education Loans Board and Kenya School of Law. But, Mr. Speaker, the issue of loans to universities is a big problem. It's a big problem. There are so many students, Mr. Speaker, from needy families, but who are being categorized in bands that their parents can never afford. I'll give you an example, Mr. Speaker. My people in Nyamira are very hardworking, Mr. Speaker. Very hardworking people. They are farmers. They deal with tea. But, Mr. Speaker, at the end of a financial year, having done farming for 12 months, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the year, you get a bonus of about 60,000, and then when they send their students to make applications, they are told that they belong to a band where they should raise up to 80,000. Let our CS, who is a son of Omogusi, Ogamba, review this funding model for our students. Mr. Speaker, the best model should be what benefited you and I, where we are all eligible to get funding and support from government. Then upon graduation, Mr. Speaker, you pay back to the government. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, for myself, if the government never extended support to me, I would never have gone to school up to university. Let us appreciate as leaders that because we were assisted, we should also be conscious, Mr. Speaker, that those who are coming after us also need help. We live in this country. We know people who come from our counties. They are needy. They don't have money, Mr. Speaker. I plead with the government, broad-based government, to take into account, Mr. Speaker, the interests of students who have expressed inability to meet their school fees, Mr. Speaker. I support.
Honorable Senators, for the convenience of the House, allow me to rearrange the sequence of today's order paper. We will move to handle order number 24. Thereafter, we'll move to order number 27 before resuming the normal flow as contained in today's order paper. Clerk, you may proceed to call those orders.
Order number 24, the Elections Amendment number 2 Bill, Senate Bills number 29 of 2024, second reading.
Now, the interruption of debate on this order, Senator Tabitha Mutinda was on her feet and she had 16 minutes to finalize her intervention. She is not present to take her 16 minutes, and therefore the floor is open to any senator wishing to contribute to this bill. Now, honorable senators, I'm not seeing any senator expressing the desire to contribute on this bill, and therefore I'll call upon the mover to reply.
Mr. Speaker, I want to appreciate colleague senators who've taken time to speak to the election amendment, Senate Bill number 2 of 2024, one of the three NADCO bills, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank Senator Okongo Mogeni, who seconded the bill, and more than actually 15 senators who took time to speak to this bill and share their concerns, Mr. Speaker, on our election management. Most important thing that I wish to say about this bill, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that you are aware, Mr. Speaker, that in the last 3 election cycles, we've had amendments to the election management practices manual, just a few months to election. And that has cost us many problems because the election managers eventually claimed that there wasn't sufficient time for them to prepare well for this process. And therefore, on this particular one, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate that this amendment is being done over close to 3 years, actually, to the next election. And therefore, IEBC will have sufficient time, Mr. Speaker, to prepare for the next election and all the amendments that we've made, Mr. Speaker. We have been told by managers, those who understand these things better and do it on practice, that changes to the election laws a bit too close to the election affects the overall result, Mr. Speaker, and compromises on the integrity of the vote by the fact that the referee is not sufficiently prepared. Part of the basics of any sport, Mr. Speaker, is that the referee needs to properly understand the games governing that particular sport. And therefore, we have given IBC ample time, Mr. Speaker, to prepare for this. By the way, it may not be known to many, IBC themselves appeared before us during the NADCO process. And I haven't checked the report of the committee, Mr. Speaker. I'll look at it before we do the amendments eventually. But I believe they subsequently appeared before our Justice and Legal Affairs Committee, which looked into this bill. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, with those very many remarks, I beg to reply. Mr. Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order number 66.3, I beg to request that the putting of the question be deferred to a later date. I thank you.
It is so deferred. Next order, clerk.
Order number 27, the Public Fundraising Appeals Bill, Senate Bills number 36 of 2024, second reading.
The Senate Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the Public Fundraising Appeals Bill 2024 be now read a second time. This is a very interesting bill, Mr. Speaker, because you will recall that earlier this year, when we had challenges in the country, there are many things that citizens brought to our attention about what was not right with our country and the things that they felt that as leaders generally and broadly, we need to address and find a long-lasting solution to. There are many things which they told us as a leadership, both parliament, those in the legislature, something for those in the judiciary, and I have subsequently seen that almost all organs of government have tried to administratively respond. I know that there have been changes in the executive, the members of the executive, even by conduct, presence, and those changes are continuing, Mr. Speaker. In the legislature here, there are certain bills that we've considered. There's still a lot to be done. Let's not lie to ourselves. This morning when I came to the office, Mr. Speaker, part of the things that I read through is a motion actually that we passed here after the invasion of Parliament on the 25th of June. And I was taking through what have we succeeded in doing so far and what haven't we. And to our credit, many of the things that internally we needed to do as Parliament, they are in the process midway. Various committees are considering if it's matters of inclusion. Our National Cohesion Committee, for example, is doing a holistic study of the report of establishment of the entire public service and seeing which are the communities that are extremely marginalized, which are the parts of the country that feel left out, because part of the complaints is that we had at that particular time is that there are parts of the country that felt that they totally do not belong to this republic. And we had asked our National Cohesion Committee, Mr. Speaker, to look even into the dodgy question of how public recruitments are done and whether it is possible by policy to dictate and guide where this is done. And PSC, by the way, Mr. Speaker, you know, many times Parliament does not get sufficient credit. But I know for a fact, for example, that PSC, this Parliamentary Service Commission of ours, perhaps because of all the things that people report about our institutions, they may not reflect and think deeply that there is anything good that comes out of Parliament. Part of our, anytime there is a recruitment exercise, and I say this with full benefit of having served as Chair of Staff Welfare for 5 years in the last session of Parliament, you are presented with a report of general representation of the country, given that there are citizens from all the 290 constituencies, and breakdown also by tribe, by religion, so that even as you do your recruitment, we have what is called the 70-30 rule as a policy. And I challenge anybody to check the recruitment policy of Parliamentary Service Commission, where 70 or 80% is done on merit, where the best students and the best candidates that appear before us, Mr. Speaker, they make it by having been the best. That's why Parliament attracts the best talent. And you see that in the reports that we get here and the quality of the technical staff that we have assisting us as legislators. But 30%, Mr. Speaker, is on something called the affirmative action. And that is a point where you include PWD, regions that are least represented, Mr. Speaker. And this program, this policy is so specific, we fine-tuned it, Mr. Speaker, that it includes even in programs that we run. I'll give you another example. You know for a fact, Mr. Speaker, that Parliament of Kenya runs an internship program for our young lawyers. They come here to intern, and we pick the best. That program is so specific because we cannot get 47 students at a go. I think we normally pick 14 or 15, I'm not sure, a number like that. Once a particular county has presented a candidate for that program, they have to sit out until the rest of the country has had an opportunity. And I was just citing examples of part of the work that is being undertaken by, say, our Committee on National Cohesion on the topic of inclusion. There are many other things that we have been asked. There are many things that Kenyans still expect us to do better. I don't see Senator Robert today here, but you know that part of our recommendations was an audit of the public debt done internally by us as Parliament with recommendations made on how this can be better managed so that you don't, Mr. Speaker, have haphazard figures being thrown here and there. What is it that we paid last year? We know that part of the reason why we are having economic challenges in the country, Mr. Speaker, is because at 70% debt to revenue exposure, Mr. Speaker, most of the revenue that we are presently collecting, this revenue that many people are complaining about, Mr. Speaker, is actually funds that we have already consumed, 70%. Therefore, for every 100 shillings that KRA collects, 70% is being used to service debt. And we had asked our finance committee, Mr. Speaker, to look into that and perhaps guide the country, for the country to appreciate what needs to be done in that particular space. So that is work that is pending, that budget and finance needs to review. We have even the issue of the wage bill, Mr. Speaker, and the cost of running government. That stands at an astronomical, I think, 1.6 trillion per year, Mr. Speaker, paying salaries and operation and maintenance. And we had said that there must be deliberate efforts by the executive, Mr. Speaker, to bring down the cost of running government. And that, you know, the beauty with a budget, Mr. Speaker, it is so open and plain. There's nothing to hide about it. It is either it is being done or not being done. And what we expect of our Budget and Finance Committee, Senator Faki is here, and I don't see Robert, but probably there are other members of that particular committee, is that eventually when they file that report, Mr. Speaker, they will tell us whether Treasury has complied, they are living up to the presidential proclamation that was made at that time, because the president did promise the country that indeed we're going to make deliberate efforts to bring down the cost of running government, Mr. Speaker. We need to see, as a legislature and the oversight arm of government, that there is that policy. Are there parastatals, for example, that are being merged? Is there a deliberate effort, Mr. Speaker, to bring down the cost of wages, Mr. Speaker, by ensuring that you rationalize staff personnel across? Because I want to believe that there are ministries which either are over enrolled, and that there are people who sit in office, Mr. Speaker, but find themselves not doing as much as they could, while there are other ministries that are understaffed, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, you do, like you do in any organization, rationalization of ensuring that you deploy, move others from this arm to the others. Therefore, there were deliberate efforts that we promised the country that we are going to take as a people of, as a legislature. Of course, there is more that was supposed to be done by the executive, which I want to believe that part of the statement that the president will be laying to the country next week when he addresses the country here in Parliament, Mr. Speaker, is how that is being achieved. This bill, now moving on to it, Mr. Speaker, is part of the public pronouncements and the request. Kenyans told us that Harambes and public fundraising appeals, if we don't keep an eye on how they are done, how they are administered, why they are being called in the first place, Mr. Speaker, then they run the risk of being avenues through which, one, money is laundered, and through which looted public resources find themselves within our political ecosystem. There's nothing wrong with Harambes, Mr. Speaker. Many of us that are in this house at one time have requested for appeals from funds from the community and friends. Either you have a sick relative, you've lost somebody. There are many of us that went to school, even in this house, through fundraisings, because that's a common thing that we do from the villages where we come from, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, I don't think that there is anything inherently wrong with Harambes. The thing, if we listen keenly, because I took time to listen to what we were being told at that particular time, Mr. Speaker, is that you must establish a mechanism through which you can keep track of the people that are making donations, Mr. Speaker, and you can keep track also of whether many of these appeals are actually end up achieving the purpose for which they were sent out to do in the first place. Second and most important thing about them, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that Kenyans insisted that there is need to greatly demonetize our politics, reduce the influence of money in our politics. And you know, Harambes have been used as platforms for political mobilization, and many times it's considered that the biggest donor, sometimes people consider him, because him or her, actually, thank you, Senator Gloria, for reminding me. People consider that particular individual to be most fit to be a particular leader, and therefore, people just didn't like it that we, state and public officers, Mr. Speaker, participate or sometimes even organize these fundraisers. The thing they were telling us is that Senator Mohamed Faki, instead of coming to fundraise for me at Shimulatewa, go to Parliament and legislate and make sure that universal health care works, so that we are all able to access government services in our public hospitals, and therefore we don't need to call any fundraiser. And we felt, okay, it's a fair request. I don't know whether it is easy to achieve it the way people tell us. But if by our very presence in these harambes, citizens felt that we needed to provide, first of all, justification, because they were curiously asking, how comes the biggest donors in these fundraisers are mostly you, the political class, either political aspirants or you that are in office, and state officers, you know, CEOs and members of boards and parastatals? Could there be a link between these funds and the many reported funds that get lost through the reports of the Auditor General? Senator Mutata here talked to us yesterday about circumstantial evidence that if you are in charge of goats and sheep, and later on people come back and ask you, how comes when we left they were 100 but now they are 90? And they ask you and you say, I don't know. I'm not sure where the 10 other goats may have gone. But then they can hear that there is a smell of goat meat coming out of your mouth, Mr. Speaker. What is the likely thing that they are likely to conclude? Or what decision are they about to make with regards to that? So there was a big conversation about how do we regulate and provide an environment where harambes are not banned, but there is a good measure of control. And we went out and sought public opinion. And I've been told, somebody spoke to me from the Secretariat today, that curiously, you may want to take time to read through which the memorandum that Kenyans sent, that it may actually not reflect what was being said at that particular time. Because you'll remember what people were saying is that we don't want you in these public fundraisers. But now that there is a proposed law before Parliament, first of all, many of the people that were sharing about clips about, I don't want this politician carrying money, including the church and the following, this time when they sent their memorandum, they said something slightly different. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, that's a question that we will need to answer another time. But we have a bill that is before us, where we are being told what is the process through which you can regulate, including even the ones that are done at the village level. And we have provided in the bill, as I begin to go close by close, Mr. Speaker, that reports will even be filed with our county assemblies, so that you're able to tell village by village in Garissa County, Senator Abdul, how many public fundraising appeals were issued in Garissa County in a particular financial year, and whether they achieved the purpose for which it was intended. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, this is a good start. The bill has 40 clauses, Mr. Speaker. And like I have mentioned, the principal object is to provide and establish a regulatory mechanisms at both the national and county levels, which oversee the conduct of fundraising appeals, to provide for licensing and regulation of fundraisers, the promotion of transparency and accountability in the conduct of fundraising appeals, and also regulated of the conduct by state and public officer in the participation of public fundraising appeal, Mr. Speaker, and in the administration of this legislation. This bill has just begun its life in Parliament. Senate is the first place where it's being considered. Kenyans have sent their views. I want to believe, Mr. Speaker, that now that this bill has actually been formally moved, there will even bound to be more debate about it. In fact, at the church that I attended last Sunday, a church where Senator Wambua is a well-respected elder at Ziwani in AIC, the bishop, who I suspect comes from, is the employer actually of Senator Wambua, a very good gentleman who preached quite an interesting sermon. At the conclusion of his sermon, reminded me and said, Senator Cheruiyot, this bishop was actually speaking on the excuses people give for not giving. Say, oh, I'm not sure how these funds are used by the administrators of a church and the following. Then eventually, in concluding his sermon, he turned to me and said, Senator, by the way, I'm aware there's a bill before the Senate on the conduct of fundraising. I hope it will not be another reason for people not to give in churches. I want to confirm to him, like I did on that Sunday, and to the country as I move this bill, that this is not an attempt to actually stop people from contributing in public fundraisers. There will be an opportunity for the region to contribute, but more importantly, there will actually be an opportunity for non-state and public officers to continue. We may perhaps not agree, and I've been told the committee will be proposing ways in which you regulate. Maybe the word licensing is a bit too strong. Maybe notification will be important so that you file a particular report on how this exercise is done and conducted. You know, this bill, Mr. Speaker, is actually replacing Chapter 106 of the Public Collections Act, Laws of Kenya, whose institutional architecture does not align with the devolved structures of the Kenyan Constitution and is not sufficiently robust to address corruption tendencies associated with public fundraising's appeal. Further, the Public Collections Act excludes from its purview charitable and religious purposes, yet this forms a large component of Harambes. The fact that, just being specific to the point that I have pointed out, that nobody is stopping fundraisers. They will be allowed. It is how they are conducted that is a question at hand here. And especially what is being put to more task, Mr. Speaker, is the conduct of state and public officers like you and I. What is the limit through which we participate? And not just us. Anybody aspiring to run for political office, the bill is proposing 3 years to an election, just like the rest of us, that if we pass this bill as presently proposed, will be barred from public collections of fundraisers, Mr. Speaker, or presiding over them. They too cannot be allowed. Therefore, you know, there are members who have seen Senator from Kwale, my good friend Senator Boy, perhaps worried and saying that I am a state officer. If you stop us, my opponents will, and you are not stopping Harambes. It's only us, public and state officers, who you are saying our conduct needs to be checked. That perhaps you're giving undue advantage to our political competitors. Nobody in the political space, Mr. Speaker, so long as you're actively seeking for election, will actually bypass this law and survive its scrutiny. Therefore, it's a level playing field. Remember what you were being told at that particular time, and it's something I agree with, that if you want a better nation, if you want to reduce on corruption, Mr. Speaker, or perhaps eventually slay it, reduce the influence of money in our politics, so that you don't have to have billions, Senator Kavindu, for you to stand a chance to be elected in Machakos. No, it doesn't mean that that is the case for everybody. And don't be too sure that what they elected you for last election is what they'll elect you with the coming election. It's good because you're hopeful, but I can tell you with a bit of more experience than you that every new election has new challenges. Mr. Speaker, the original spirit of Harambee was that individuals will voluntarily contribute their resources in form of cash, although labor and other materials were also welcome towards the provision of common good. The Harambee motto in the independent Kenya became more than a motto. It actually symbolized the Kenyan unity, patriotism, and most importantly, the future. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I want to propose to the House to take time, read through the bill, see if members of this House, the public, eventually tell us that what we were hearing at that particular time, we didn't hear them correctly, and they want this practice to continue. You know, we are humble servants of the people, Mr. Speaker. We will do that which they have asked us to do. But this is part of the reaction to the requests that were being made to us at that particular time, something which we must oblige and do. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I will allow my colleague, the Senator for Mombasa, Senator Mohamed Ngunyi Haji Faki, to continue actually expounding blow by blow on other provisions of the bill as he seconds, because I needed to set the basis upon which this bill is being prepared before the House, so that eventually we can make an informed decisions. And Kenyans will not look at us and say, Senator Beatrice, when things were hot in the country, you promised us that you'll do this, but you eventually never tried. I'd rather that let it be known that the Senate of Kenya presented the opportunity, but either Kenyans or through their representatives, they chose otherwise, and we choose how to conduct that particular space. With those very many remarks, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move and request the Senator for Mombasa, Senator Ngunyi Haji, to second. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Asante Mheshimiwa Spika kwa kunipa fursa hii kuunga mkono mswada wa marekebisho, mswada wa uchangishaji fedha wa mwaka 2024. Mheshimiwa Spika, kwanza ningempongeza kiongozi wa wengi kwa kuweza kuleta mswada huu katika bunge la Senate. Mheshimiwa Spika, ikumbukwe kwamba hapo nyuma, kabla ya mzozo tuliokuwa nao katikati ya mwaka huu, ilikuwa masuala ya harambee katika maeneo mengine ilikuwa ni kama mashindano. Mheshimiwa Spika, wenzetu walikuwa wanakwenda katika harambee zile na magunia ya fedha, unahesabu, wananchi wanaambiwa hesabu, unahesabu mpaka ile hesabu inapotea, milioni 20 ambazo zimetolewa katika harambee moja. Mheshimiwa Spika, na tukiangalia Mheshimiwa Spika, zile tarakimu ambazo mchangishaji yule ameweza kufaili kwa KRA mwisho wa mwaka, hana mapato ya milioni 20 ambayo ameweza kupata, aoneshe kwamba nimepata milioni 20 kwenye biashara hii ama kwenye kazi hii, na nimelipa kodi kiasi hichi, na leo natoa mchango wa milioni 20 kama mchango wangu katika harambee hiyo. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, harambee zilikuwa zimefika kiwango ambacho wengi walikuwa wanazitumia vibaya. Imekuwa ni mambo ya mashindano, na hatukatai, hata dini yetu ya Kiislamu inasema watu washindane katika mambo ya kheri. Lakini Mheshimiwa Spika, ile ilikuwa imefika kiwango ambacho inakejeli pia wale wananchi ambao wamechangishiwa pesa zile. Kwa hiyo Mheshimiwa Spika, katika muktadha huo ndio tumeona kwamba kiongozi wa wengi aliweza kuja na mswada huu wa sheria kurekebisha na kutilia nguvu masuala ya uchangishaji pesa. Harambee Mheshimiwa Spika, zimeweza kusaidia pakubwa nchi hii kutoka hayati Jomo Kenyatta alipoanzisha mfumo huu wa maendeleo. Tumeona shule zimejengwa, tumeona hospitali zimejengwa, tumeona mambo mengi ambayo yamefanyika katika mfumo huu wa harambee. Kwa hiyo itakuwa sio harambee ya wazi, yani public fundraising. Kwa hivyo Mheshimiwa Spika, hizi harambee za kibinafsi si lazima kuandikishwa. Sheria inasema kwamba si lazima, mswada huu unasema kwamba si lazima kuandikishwa, kwa hivyo ina maana kwamba zitakuwa ziko huru. Mheshimiwa Spika, vile vile sheria hii inatunyima sisi nafasi ya kuhusika katika masuala ya harambee. Kwa hivyo wabunge na maafisa wa umma wengine watakuwa hawaruhusiwi kushiriki katika harambee, na Seneta Cheruiyot alipokuwa akiongoza mswada huu alisema kwamba hata wale ambao wana nia za kugombania viti miaka mitatu kabla ya uchaguzi hawatahusika na masuala yote ya harambee katika nchi yetu ya Kenya. Mheshimiwa Spika, vile vile mwenye kufanya harambee ama yule msimamizi wa harambee lazima atafute permit ili aweze kuendesha harambee. Na Mheshimiwa Spika, wengi wanasema kwamba harambee inaleta vikwazo kwa masuala ya permit, inaleta vikwazo kwa masuala ya harambee. Lakini Mheshimiwa Spika, ipo haja, kwa sababu tumeona kwamba wengine waliwahi kuchangisha pesa kwa madhumuni fulani, baadaye hawakuweza kutekeleza yale madhumuni ambayo wameyafanya. Na vile vile pia kuna harambee nyingi ambazo tunaweza kusema ni ghushi katika mambo ambayo wataka kufanya, lakini pesa zikishaingia zinatumika kwa mambo ambayo hayakukusudiwa katika harambee hili. Mheshimiwa Spika, kwa hivyo mswada huu unatoa mwongozo kwa masuala ya harambee kwa undani zaidi, na ningeomba maseneta wenzangu waweze kusoma. La msingi ni kwamba hakuna harambee ambayo inapingwa ama inazuiliwa na mswada huu, lakini ule uwezo wa sisi wabunge na maafisa wa umma kuweza kuendesha harambee na kuweza kwenda katika harambee na mamilioni ya pesa ambazo hatujui zimepatikana vipi, Mheshimiwa Spika, hiyo ndio inapingwa katika mswada huu. Mheshimiwa Spika, sheria hii pia inatoa nafasi kwa waziri kutengeneza sheria endelevu, yani delegated regulations, ili ziweze kuhakikisha kwamba sheria hii inatumika kufanya kazi. Mheshimiwa Spika, naunga mkono mswada huu na naomba maseneta wote waunge mkono. Asante.
Honorable Senators, I'll now proceed to propose the question that the Public Fundraising Appeals Bill, Senate Bills number 36 of 2024, be now read a second time. Honorable Senators, the floor is now open for debate. Senator Cherankei Samson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. For this, I think one of the critical issues that the Gen Z raised during the protracted demonstrations across the country was the display of opulence by politicians, which was more dominant during public fundraisings than Harambee, Mr. Speaker. I think in the spirit of Harambee at the building of this nation, and the senior youth representative, Senator Uhuru Odinga, who is older than all of us, maybe tell us, is that, Mr. Speaker, the Harambee, as we used to know in the building of this country, went and changed over time, Mr. Speaker. We have done Harambees in many things, Mr. Speaker. I can see sometimes sports, we do Harambees. I see clubs doing Harambees, AFC, Leopard, Gor Mahia, and the rest. Mr. Speaker, and it comes to the attention of the House that national women amputee was stranded in Frankfurt, Germany, Mr. Speaker, after even winning number 4. So I don't know whether we need to fundraise for them, Mr. Speaker, and even videos doing rounds in social media, Mr. Speaker, is they are sleeping in very bad places as they remain stranded, Mr. Speaker. I hope something can be done, but of course somebody in charge there, that is his quality of performance. Mr. Speaker, the issue of charges, religious organizations, Mr. Speaker, has been, we normally every Sunday, maybe, I don't know, Mr. Speaker, what we should do to religious organization, churches and mosques. and other organizations, because they don't have direct money from anywhere, from either private or allocation from budget. And I think in future we might need to budget, Mr. Speaker, for the building of religious places, Mr. Speaker. Because even if today you are to deny Harambes to happen, Mr. Speaker, how will the church or how will the religious organization be able to fund the building of churches, the building of mosques, or any religious places of worship, Mr. Speaker? And I think we need to be very careful so that we don't overreach in this issue of regulating of financial rewards, Mr. Speaker. Because I think either the county government can budget for building of religious places of worship, or we can allocate from the national budget. In any case, 85% of national budget remains with the national and 15%, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the common is the issue of hospital bills. I know every senator, including yourself, you are normally in WhatsApp groups trying to fundraise for somebody who is sick, Mr. Speaker, even on compassionate grounds, even including funeral expenses, Mr. Speaker. But I think one of the biggest challenge to many Kenyans is the hospital bill. We hope the social health insurance, the share issue, will be able to resolve, Mr. Speaker. And I hope with us contributing more towards the social health authority, and the now transiting from NHIF to SHA, Mr. Speaker, will allow Kenyans to access medical care that they will not need to call for Harambes. Because every weekend, if it is not an Harambe for funeral expenses and medical expenses, it is for education. If it is not for education, Mr. Speaker, it is for building of places of worship, Mr. Speaker. So I hope and believe that the issue of hospital bill, if we are able to address the issue of fixing SHA, and ensure that access to medical care is accessible to all Kenyans through universal health coverage, Mr. Speaker, we shall reduce by 80% contributions or Harambes that are done in support of hospital bills across the country. And you know the problem, Mr. Speaker, is not even the hospital bills. It is that we have commercialized medical services in this country. When you walk to a private facility, health center, they cannot explain to you as why they are charging, for example, the amount they are charging in their medical bills. I saw in some instances a private medical facility was charging 20 million on medical bill. When you ask them the gloves, the syringes, they cannot quantify or who gives them. I think the issue we should regulate the private health facilities across the country. Because no one can tell us whenever they give you an hospital bill. And I know, for example, like Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital, Jaramogi Oginga Hospital, Coast General Provincial Hospital, Nakuru, the Rift Valley, they have a way of doing waivers to the needy, Mr. Speaker, that is being done by. But these private facilities, you saw Beauty and Buy, that led to the budge of the late, may her soul rest, Lucy, who was buried the other day, Mr. Speaker, that you are being told that that facility is licensed. The allegations we are hearing is licensed to provide massage and masseuse services, but you are told they were doing some surgery for beauty issues, and it shows that there is a problem within the system, Mr. Speaker. And I hope at the end of it all, we should be able to address such issues of having. Even one of the major issues is compassionate donations, Mr. Speaker. We have seen. I remember in the last session, Mr. Speaker, some of us have been around for some time. In fact, and then the code, was it called a Coalition of Restoration of Democracy? When the teachers were on strike, they came up with a pay bill to fundraise for teachers then. Although no one told us what happened to that money that was being raised, Mr. Speaker, I hope with the audit coming under this bill, we will be able to know when such causes happen, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I agree largely with the spirit of the bill, but I have reservations, Mr. Speaker, that, and you know, even in this issue of fundraising, Mr. Speaker, I have some reservations to it. What I expected from this bill, Mr. Speaker, was just the process. We should have simplified. You want to do an Harambe? Yes. Where do you go? You get a permit. But, Mr. Speaker, introducing a cabinet secretary, a CCM, audits, you know, taxation, you know, it's unnecessary. It is lethargy of the entire process, clogging the process. We should make the issue of doing an Harambe in this country to be very simple, where you just need a permit to do an Harambe. Give us a substantive reason. If it is a medical reason, let it be known, medical bills, Mr. Speaker. If it is about, Mr. Speaker, building a religious place, let it be known. If it is about compassionate grounds, let it be known, Mr. Speaker. And I don't see the need why involve. I thought the cabinet secretaries of this republic have better things to do than regulate Harambes, Mr. Speaker. I would have expected that we would just given a law that, we give even through a law that provides, Mr. Speaker, for that appeals. On the issue of appeals, Mr. Speaker, I'll clear there's public fundraising bills. You remember when there was a ravaging drought and there were issue of anger in the country, Mr. Speaker. You remember Kenyans for Kenyans that was being done to fundraise for Kenyans. I agree that such, Mr. Speaker, we can say on public fundraising appeals, we do audit. I don't know whether Morara Kebaso, who is fundraising to go and audit for fuel and working around with security, I don't know whether Morara Kebaso, the proponent of Inject, is part of public fundraising appeals. Because when you fundraise to fuel your car, to do something, I don't know whether it is part of the public fundraising. And I agree, there must be standards as to such, Mr. Speaker. I don't know, public fundraising involves also fundraising for campaigns. I have not seen in this bill, Mr. Speaker. Although we have campaigning finance laws in this country, but this public, I think we should have just regulated in terms of auditing. Let us regulate to public fundraising appeals. We don't create bureaucracy. You can imagine some small village somewhere in Nandi. I've lost someone. Their target to bury an individual is 250,000 shillings. Why create a bureaucracy for them to look for a chief, to go and look for CCM of Sijui what, or a cabinet secretary to get an approval to fundraise for 250,000 shillings? Why don't you bring a standardized form for just permit to request to do an election, to do a fundraiser? And they should start it with the lowest person there, Mr. Speaker, that is Mzee wa Mitaa. The lowest person, just get approval from the local chief. How many in Machakos, how many people in that small village know of CCM or know of even Waziri or even sub-county administrator? I think, Mr. Speaker, it's very unfortunate that we want to do. Mr. Speaker, I don't see anything that receive, vet, and process applications. Let me walk to the chief's office with a permit to do an Harambee, let the chief look at it, and then I'm allowed to do an Harambee. But to public fundraising appeals like for the food, that one you can do the vetting and approval. But on this one, sir, private, Mr. Speaker, I don't see any need. Even the audit, investigate misuse of funds, I agree. These are issues that can be done in public. Establishment of endowment funds, which is important. I know like Ratansi and other endowment funds who support, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, even on the role of Cabinet Secretary and County Executive Committee member, Mr. Speaker, inspection of records. Mr. Speaker, there are many better things that the CCM and a Cabinet Secretary can do rather than, Mr. Speaker, regulating Harambes. Let us also be fair to this country. Let us prepare laws that are fair to the Kenyans, Mr. Speaker. No one is refusing. Harambee is good. Some of us, like me, Mr. Speaker, are a product of Harambes. If I didn't get Harambee support, Mr. Speaker, maybe I will not be a senator, because even going through my schooling education, a number of us in this house. So let us not lose the real and noble intentions of Harambee. We agree individuals have hijacked Harambes to launder their money. You are seeing cases where people are contributing 5 million shillings cash, 10 million shillings cash, and their salaries are known. Somebody is earning 500,000, after tax, 300,000, and they take loan maybe through what we call mortgage, Mr. Speaker. How can somebody contribute 5 million in Harambee, and yet we know your salary, we know your cows, we know where what you do? Mr. Speaker, I agree. There was a problem where Harambes were being used to launder public money. But, Mr. Speaker, we should not kill the spirit of the Harambee. Harambee is good, and I've said, Mr. Speaker, for us who grew up in the village, it is because of Harambes that we went to schools. It is because of Harambee that kettle dips were being built. It is because of Harambee that we have good places of worship, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day. So let us not lose that good intention. Mr. Speaker, solicitation members or public for public or private benefit, I agree, Mr. Speaker. I know people who do fundraising, Mr. Speaker, for their own selfish benefit. We must root out such individuals. If you do an Arambe, it should be something. We don't want also Kenyans, Mr. Speaker, to do an Arambe to buy a vehicle or to build a personal house or to buy a good suit. We must agree that Arambes are important, Mr. Speaker. They assist in alleviating economic burdens, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think on regulation, I have insisted that let us know the target. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I'm proposing a committee of the whole. When an Arambe is being done, before a permit is issued, Mr. Speaker, if a target is beyond 1 million, let us say you need a permit from target of 1 million. But below 1 million, let us just notify the local administrator like the chief or Mzee Amita, Mr. Speaker. Because if you require a permit to do 100,000, 150,000 somewhere in Siaya, in small village, where they have a small something for funeral, I know in Luo Nyanza, the process of funeral expenses are quite expensive because it's an elaborate process. But why would people who are fundraising for 250,000 require a permit, Mr. Speaker? Let us say from 1 million and above, you need a permit. And the process of approval, let us leave it to the level of within the Ngao administration, Mr. Speaker, or CCM, Mr. Speaker. Number 2, Mr. Speaker, is on the lifestyle audit. The people who do this fundraiser, they have been using to launder public money. Let also lifestyle be audited. If lifestyle audit is done, we don't need this law. If you lifestyle audit for individuals, Mr. Speaker, we suspect, Mr. Speaker, I'm rushing through so that my colleagues can. In clause number 11, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy. And I want to, Mr. Speaker, you saw my county assembly yesterday when the ad hoc report was being tabled to try and redeem Nandi County from bad governance of Governor Sang, Mr. Speaker, they ended up disagreeing, Mr. Speaker, because people are stealing to go and give in public. People are stealing county money to go and do big fundraisers, Mr. Speaker. In fact, Mr. Speaker, when you find my governor in public Arambes, like Governor Sang is giving 1,500,000, yet we know the salary. That is how corruption thrives, for example, in Nandi, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank the great people of Nandi for coming out in large numbers yesterday, up to midnight, Mr. Speaker, to defend and protect their rights, Mr. Speaker. Even I'm happy, I want to tell the church, the religious organization, Sadaka Ijaguswa. So I heard a senator saying when he appeared before the church, the pastor was preaching that this public fundraiser, I want to assure the church and religious organizations. Mr. Speaker, I know Pastor Nganga and the rest of retinue, Pastor Nganga and the rest of preachers might blame the Senate. I want to assure Pastor Nganga and the rest, Mr. Speaker, that the Sadaka and tithes has not been touched. So it will not form part of public. So members, the issue of Sadaka, tithes, and donation to the church, and even joining membership of your organization, Mr. Speaker, shall not be touched. And even, Mr. Speaker, the issue of receiving lottery or raffle like winning sport pesa and the rest, Mr. Speaker, has not been touched. So I want to assure members, because I met my religious leaders, I've been argued on basis whether Sadaka or tithes it has not been touched. The law has exempted such, the tithes and Sadaka not to be touched, Mr. Speaker, and therefore I want to agree. Mr. Speaker, moving on swiftly. On clause number 13, I can see my time is almost. Mr. Speaker, I don't agree that we ban public officers or elected officials from conducting an Arambe. What I am proposing, let us not make it 3 years, let us make it 6 months to elections. And in case of a by-election, let us agree 1 month before a by-election, Mr. Speaker. 3 years, Mr. Speaker, if 3 years is into, all of us will be disqualified from participating in 2027. Because let us make it 6 months to the general election. We ban public officials and elected members of parliament from conducting a fundraiser, Mr. Speaker. And also the fine should be reduced from 5 million to 500,000, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on the issue of submitted for permit, Mr. Speaker, I don't see the need of cabinet secretary. The Kenyan cabinet secretary are too busy to regulate Arambes. Please, let us ensure cabinet secretaries are not part, they are too busy. If they cannot even come here to answer our questions, what are you telling us, Mr. Speaker, will be able to approve permits of 250,000 on my village in Mosoriat, Mr. Speaker? Let us also be honest. What is a cabinet secretary doing issuing a permit when they cannot even do their job right? Mr. Speaker, let us, in fact, the cabinet secretary should be allowed to do other more important things, Mr. Speaker. Let us avoid this The Cabinet Secretary, the CCM should keep off their Harambes, Mr. Speaker. Let the government keep off their Harambes. Let the people self-regulate. Let the law regulate, Mr. Speaker, so that we don't use Harambes, Mr. Speaker, at the expedience of others, Mr. Speaker. So please, the Cabinet Secretary are too busy. We have given them more responsibility than regulating Harambee of 250,000 shillings somewhere in Mosoriot or somewhere in Mutembei village, somewhere in Kaptel, Mr. Speaker, or somewhere in Chemamul or Setek in Tindred, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I totally disagree with auditing of Harambes, Mr. Speaker, especially for private one. If I've raised 250,000 to do a funeral expense, why would you do an audit of 200? In fact, you will be using more money sending KRA officers to come and audit 250,000 shillings that are meant for funeral expenses, or 250,000 to send a child to school. What is this, Mr. Speaker? KRA have more important things than auditing fundraisers, Mr. Speaker. So on the issue of taxation, the KRA involvement of auditing, Mr. Speaker, let us give the standard. Let us say if you raise, especially public fundraising, your Safaricom Kenyans for Kenyans, Mr. Speaker, although I've never understood why Safaricom, when your data expires, they take it away. I find it that corruption. Mr. Speaker, when we have raised 100 million, for example, let KRA and others audit. But this small money, Mr. Speaker, you don't need to burden KRA. We have more better things in this country. Mr. Speaker, I will only support this law, Mr. Speaker, if it is only to give a regulatory framework on how to conduct an Harambee in a simplified version. Let us not create bureaucracy in terms of conducting Harambes, Mr. Speaker. Let us allow the church and public places to do their Harambes, Mr. Speaker. Let us allow Kenyans who don't have economically burden to do private Harambes of medical expenses, of compassionate expenses, Mr. Speaker. Let us allow Kenyans to do funeral Harambes to send their children to universities, Mr. Speaker. I agree. There is a progressive university funding model, but it will not touch every Kenyan. There are many young men and women who are in school today, courtesy of Harambes. I'm a product of Harambes, Mr. Speaker. I think we need to rethink about this law, and I will be asking my brother, Senator Cheruyot, to rethink about this law. We might even request him to withdraw fast so that we come up with a simplified version of conducting an Harambes, Mr. Speaker. We should not say because Gen Z were protesting. They are only non-leaders. If you see a leader giving out 20 million or 55 million in a Harambee, what the best you can do is to tell the EACC to do lifestyle audit. You don't ban the Harambee. If you see Cherargei giving 20 million in an Harambee, and you know he doesn't have that money, just send the EACC to do lifestyle audit and KRA. That's how we resolve this issue. Mr. Speaker, allow me 30 minutes. I think the Spirit of the Lord has just gotten, not 30 minutes, 1 second, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I reject this fundraising bill until we amend it to fit Kenyans so that they can comfortably do fundraising without interference from government or from anybody. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Beatrice Ogola.
Honorable Speaker, the Harambee of public appeal, as it's referred to, is a voluntary exercise, Honorable Speaker. There is a saying which says, Honorable Speaker, that when you want to kill a dog, you give it a bad name. Correct. So, Honorable Speaker, a few of us have abused this noble activity that has helped this nation come up with very, very credible institutions, Honorable Speaker. The Harambee spirit, Honorable Speaker, is a spirit of our forefathers. When we grew up, Honorable Speaker, there were even schools that were referred to as Harambee schools. And because people came together, they collected the little that each one of them had, and Honorable Speaker, they were able to put up schools that notable personalities in this country went through, and today they are credible people wherever they are, Honorable Speaker. I was amazed, Honorable Speaker, when the mover of this bill referred to an issue of seeking public opinion. Honorable Speaker, why would we seek public opinion? when we know what Harambee has done in this country. Honorable Speaker, it is only a few of us that have abused this noble initiative called Harambee, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, Harambee is giving what you have. You have a few because of a problem that is there, either in a family or in a community. Sometimes, Honorable Speaker, we are able to contribute in the spirit of giving to build churches, Honorable Speaker. And you know, Honorable Speaker, as much as we do, that CDF was initiated in this country, and there are specific things that it contributes to. A number of it is only limited to the development of schools, the development of institutions, and here, Honorable Speaker, with the coming of devolution, we now have two levels of government that control development, the national government and the county government. But there's a missing link. There are limits to which they can do to satisfy our people. Honorable Speaker, as I stand here, in our constituency, in a ward called Kanyidoto Ward, we lost a third-year student from Moi University who drowned in a river somewhere in Keses, Honorable Speaker. A river, if I'm not very sure, a river called Sosiani River. There were two students who drowned. But Honorable Speaker, the student that comes from our constituency, Chris Otieno, who was a third-year student, and I want to share in that belief, and I want to feel with the family. The father of this young boy is called Kasera, equally just a young man. Honorable Speaker, if you reflect in that family and see the pathetic situation in that home today, there would be no way in which the family of Chris would transport the body from Eldoret to Ndewa and bury if members of the community and families around it and a few of us who are leaders do not come together to support that family. And these are the noble areas in which Harambee has helped. A number of funerals, I know a number of leaders here are involved in support of funerals, either formally or informally, Honorable Speaker. Currently, people form WhatsApp. Some of us are not able to be in all those WhatsApp because it would not be easy to manage. But however, Honorable Speaker, we still find a way of supporting these bereaved families. Some of them are people who have died after being terminally ill for so many years. A number of them, cancer patients here in Nairobi, liver problems, and all the medical problems we have. So by the time somebody loses their life, Honorable Speaker, the family already is down. So this is an initiative that has supported families. The support has not only been limited to funerals. There are even medical appeals, Honorable Speaker. If we go and we just go to each other and look at our phones, we'll find every other person is involved in some medical appeal, if not 3, 4, 5, some even more than that, Honorable Speaker. But what options do we have, Honorable Speaker? These families are needy. People have said have even gone to school through these Harambees. And Harambees, Honorable Speaker, is not physically coming somewhere, collecting to physically give money. Harambees is about voluntary support. A number of people even pay school fee for university students. Right where I was seated this afternoon, I've just been supporting a university student at the Nairobi University who has not had an hostel for the beginning of the semester. They are not able to pay for accommodation. They are not able to pay for their food. They have not even paid for fee, Honorable Speaker. That is also a form of giving. So, Honorable Speaker, we cannot ban the spirit of Harambee that has supported our people in different ways. Honorable Speaker, the reason why I say we cannot ban is because we cannot create a problem as leaders and then want to find ways to solve them. Honorable Speaker, how did we come to this conversation? We had leaders, some of them favored, a number of them political, who abused this process. Just last year, Honorable Speaker, we saw a number of us flying in choppers with bags of money, some of them carrying in sacks, some of them carrying this money in bags, Honorable Speaker. I remember one video of a leader who was even dancing with money and saying 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, 10 million, up to I don't know which level of million. That is how we came to the conversation that we have here, Honorable Speaker. But the most disparate situation that they created for us, Honorable Speaker, is that now they were flying money on the face of hungry and angry Kenyans. You could see leaders dangling money, and you saw the crowds they were dangling money to, crowds that comprised of parents who are not able to pay even school fees. Parents leaders dangling money, and you saw the crowds they were dangling money to, crowds that comprised of parents who are not able to pay even school fees. Parents who were hungry, had not fed their children, Honorable Speaker. They were both hungry and angry, Honorable Speaker. And finally, Honorable Speaker, we saw the angry, unemployed Kenyans. Honorable Speaker, you can feel with the Kenyans the discomfort of having to see money flying in your face, people arriving in money in choppers, while children are at home because you've not paid fee, while you have not fed your children, Honorable Speaker, while your youths who finished university 5, 6, 10 years ago, and they have no jobs, and then you have people flying in money. And Honorable Speaker, that is how we came into the situation in which we are in. I've told you, Honorable Speaker, that CDF came to support schools, but there are certain entities that have no support. For example, the churches that we have around. Honorable Speaker, I can tell you we are from recess, and over recess I attended a number of churches. One of them, a church called Nyabera Royal Israel in North Kabwochi Ward in Dewa constituency. And Honorable Speaker, if I gave you the picture of that church, I do not know how else they would be able to develop that church if people do not come together to support them, Honorable Speaker. And so, Honorable Speaker, the issue of Harambee is voluntary. But let us look at the Harambees vis-a-vis the Chapter 6 of the Constitution, Honorable Speaker. The Chapter 6 of the Constitution talks about leadership and integrity. Already there's a mention of honesty. Honorable Speaker, there's a mention of accountability. Honorable Speaker, there's a mention of discipline. So, an issue of people carrying monies in bags does not arise if you are honest, Honorable Speaker. If you are honest with ourselves, we would not need regulations to manage Harambees, Honorable Speaker. And so, Honorable Speaker, we cannot ban Harambees. We need Harambees to support the less fortunate. And Honorable Speaker, when we mention the issue of auditing, when people have given freely, they have given for a purpose. There's a reason why they are coming together to contribute. And it is willing. And there's a purpose. And there's a mission they want to accomplish. Why would we bring in the issue of audit? Honorable Speaker, even in our sectors, we have not achieved so much by audit because a number of misgivings are still even in the way our finances are handled, Honorable Speaker. So, Honorable Speaker, I support the fact that the Harambee system needs to be carried as the tradition was carried forward by our forefathers in the spirit of giving what you have. And it is about willingness. It is not about chest thumping and a show of power. it is about solving a need that arises. Honorable Speaker, I want to say no to the idea that we can stop Harambes, because the Harambes, we need them. But how would we bring in the idea of bureaucracy, the idea of clearance for our people to hold Harambes, Honorable Speaker? Honorable Speaker, by introducing activities as clearance, we would be creating gods in our communities. You'd be given a chief or a cabinet minister or a CEC. They have work already cut out for them, which they are not able even to accomplish. This week, Honorable Speaker, just yesterday, the Senate was sitting here and cabinet secretaries were not able to come here to answer to our questions. So how do we again get them involved in voluntary activities as Harambes? Honorable Speaker, when you bring in the issue of clearance, that you have to line up to achieve or to whoever you want to propose, Honorable Speaker, that we reflect back to the KANU days, where people just created rules and executed them. We do not want to create gods for our people who are already disadvantaged. If you have a funeral, you have a funeral. Honorable Speaker, allow people to collect around with the people who believe in the problem that they have and let them support them. If you want to put regulations and give somebody power to give a clearance, Honorable Speaker, we will be creating mini gods who will decide when you will have a problem, when you need to solve this problem, and who will even. Honorable Speaker, even this, there's a practice where leaders have to get clearance from elsewhere to hold certain public functions. We've had very embarrassing situations where the person who holds the power to make clearance decides who holds a function and who doesn't hold a function. So, Honorable Speaker, I want to say that giving is in the heart. It is not the how much that you give. Let us give our people the space to give. Let us not call a dog a bad name in order to kill it. Let us not kill the spirit of Harambee, but Honorable Speaker, let us go by the chapter 6 that talks about leadership and integrity. And Honorable Speaker, by observing that chapter, Honorable Speaker, we will have done a lot of good to the Harambee process. But Honorable Speaker, we must caution leaders who once they are in position, power gets into their head. I do not have any reason why anybody would fly in choppers with bags of money and provoke Kenyans. And specifically, Honorable Speaker, that is what even fund more of the Gen Z problem, because we had young people with no jobs and they were seeing people flying in this country with money. Honorable Speaker, I support the Harambee spirit as was initiated by our forefathers, because that is how a number of people have been supported to be educated. That is a way in which a number of churches have been built. That is how a number of schools were put together. That is how even the school buses we see around. Honorable members have given donations, have given deposits, but the parents in the school and the surrounding communities have always supported by the Harambee spirit. But Honorable Speaker, as I end my speech, let us not abuse it. Let us enrich it. Let us encourage that people are able to contribute the little they have, that it is voluntary and giving is in the heart and it is not the how much that you give. Honorable Speaker, I support the Harambee spirit.
Senator Gloria Ruoba.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Allow me to start by engaging the House. When you hear anyone saying, Harambee, what's the first thing that you answer or that you think of? Nyayo. So let us not lie to ourselves, because we can speak and speak and speak, but this spirit of Harambee was even a political declaration. Because Harambee meant let's pull together our resources, let's come together, and then let's do what? Follow the footsteps of an individual. And that is what we are referring to as forefathers, yeah? But I want to pose a question. This Harambee Nyayo came in 19 what? If anyone, I wasn't even born, Mr. Speaker. Our maybe our youth senator can guide us on when Harambee was born, and we said Nyayo to follow the footsteps. Huh? And Mr. Speaker, why I start there is so that we can stop lying to ourselves that Harambee...
Gloria, do you want to be informed by Senator Oburu?
Yes, because you know he's our youth representative and he was alive during that time.
Mr. Speaker, I want to inform my sister that this spirit of Harambee started just when the independence was at the corner, when there was an old man in Kisumu called Mulu Harambee, and he used to call it Harambee for people to come together and pull together a rope. And there's a book written by somebody called Owino Mbudo about the Harambee spirit. So Kenyatta picked it. Mzee Kenyatta picked it in the struggle after he was released from detention, and he started executing the spirit of Harambee, that we pull together to push out the colonial yoke from our country. So that is when it started, early 60s. Thank you.
Senator Gloria.
Thank you, my youth representative. And I like that he has said it started by an individual, a gentleman, and then it was mainstreamed by a politician for political purposes. And that is my point exactly, that we can say that it is a spirit of giving, but bottom line, when the Nyayo was put in there, it was a spirit of let us come together and let us follow this individual who is now running on something called Nyayo. And Mr. Speaker, the reason I was asking for the timelines is because I also want to ask my colleagues as we debate this bill, during that time, did we have devolved functions? Did we have structures where we can support our social systems? Did we even have things that we are now calling finance bills? Were our taxes as heavy as they are today, Mr. Speaker? Because the spirit of Harambee, you can justify it and clean it up and make it look like such a beautiful thing that we must all support. But in real essence, the spirit of Harambee in 2024 is a spirit of dependency. It is a spirit of saying we are agreeing that our broken systems in healthcare, our broken systems in social services, our broken systems in the education system, in all these things, including housing, is what we are promoting so that we can now all together and say Harambee again and go back to our pockets so that we can now give money to people. Why, Mr. Speaker? It was fancy during the time when I'm sure our youth representative was a teenager. It was probably encouraged because at that time we were living in communities of social welfare. People were taking care of each other. And it was something to look up to. But today in 2024, when each individual is being encouraged to take up an income generating activity so that they can pay taxes, why then would we promote a spirit of dependency, Mr. Speaker? And without opening speech, I want to say that I support this bill because what this bill does is it forces us leaders to stop encouraging the spirit of dependency, Mr. Speaker. When I talk about the spirit of dependency, it's not just leaders who go to Harambees to give money for funerals, to give money for health reasons and all these things. Mr. Speaker, in my circles, and in my social circles, every single opportunity, we are talking about weddings, We are talking about, oh, next weekend we are going to visit so-and-so in whoever's house. And the first thing they do, they open a pay bill or a till number. Or they say, oh, so-and-so is collecting this number. Why? We are actually encouraging a spirit of dependency in this country. And that is the reason why I feel that some of the structures that we have in place, which we should push and make sure that we have efficiency in those structures, we are so sidetracked with the fact that if someone in your family dies, it is like, okay, set up a WhatsApp group, collect money. Why? We have insurance companies, we have our social security fund, which we should question and bring bills to this house and say, this social security fund, why doesn't it cater for funerals? Or if it caters for funerals, why can't we make it so efficient that nobody should be able to say, we are collecting money for a funeral? Because the first question that Kenyans will ask you is, why are you collecting money for funerals? And yet funerals are catered for under this social security fund. So, Mr. Speaker, again I say, every single time you hear of this word harambe, I challenge any member of this house, because I know I'm one of the youngest, and we even have younger ones, but we all remember that harambe was Nyayo, follow an individual. And if you look at that time of that individual, we were 100% dependent on a centralized system that was governed by one man. And that was our former president. This being a house that supports devolution, we should be ashamed of ourselves to come to the floor of the house and say that, the spirit of harambe, churches should be built, it should not be set aside, because we should be ashamed. We should support this bill, because what we are trying to say is, as the upper house, the one that protects devolution, the one that ensures that we give monies to those devolved functions on the county level, we are pushing for accountability to the extent that the healthcare works, the housing schemes work, the education sector works, so that we do not have any reason to come here and defend any form of law legislation that actually calls for us to go back to when Senator Oburu was telling me, I think he has said 1960 something, we have no business looking back and to go back and emulate what our forefathers were doing when there was no devolution, there was no technology, there was no, we are advanced. So for me, Mr. Speaker, I support this bill. And I can tell you, because some of us, as much as we are in politics, we probably don't fit in this political space. I have analyzed all the politicians in this house. And if there is one thing, Mr. Speaker, politicians are afraid of, every Thursday, like today, you can see the house, people are moving in, out. Mr. Speaker, they are looking for money, because tomorrow they are doing funerals. Then they have to go and contribute. Because on Saturday, they are going to go to the ground, because they have to go and give money to social groups. They are in and out of this house. They are distracted that they cannot even contribute to this bill, because when it strikes Thursday, Mr. Speaker, politicians are stressed. They have to go back to the grassroots. They have to go back for harambes. They know they have all these community groups that are waiting for them in the grassroots, and they are saying, Senator, umeleta ngapi? So, Mr. Speaker, in that essence, what are we really doing when we are saying our 2010 constitution, which pushed for devolution of services, what are we really saying when we are saying then, okay, we don't support this bill because we want us to continue contributing? Mr. Speaker, if not for nothing, as a legislator who has sat in this house for 2 years, I can tell you that we must continue to push for services to be delivered 100% efficiently by government, so that we can stop the spirit of dependency, which is what we are hiding behind by saying harambe is our forefathers, harambe is this and that. No, it is a spirit of dependency that we need to put aside, and we need to really question ourselves as Africans. Mr. Speaker, I know there are those who will say that, Mr. Speaker, if you can protect me from Senator Mofire, I think he is also looking for money for this weekend's Harambee, if you can protect me. Mr. Speaker, I have to say that we have a whole...
Senator Mofaya, what is your point of order? Your mic.
I think Speaker? Honorable Speaker, for the record, I think that one to be struck off the record, the answer. I'm not looking for any money. If there is anything that I'm looking for, I'm consulting to so that I can come towards the bill.
Very well, Senator Gloria.
I apologize, Mofaya, and withdraw. Mr. Speaker, I want to go to, this is the Memorandum of Objectives and the reasons, so that we can remind ourselves as to why this piece of legislation was here. That's page 700 and, no, what is that? 726, that's how it's paginated at the top. Memorandum of Objectives and Reasons. On paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, paragraph 4. It clearly states that the bill is also based on the need to reduce the culture of dependency that Harambes have imbued in the society, extending even essentially private affairs to larger public. If you read further down, it says, its passage will promote the use of devolved structures as entities for promoting structured social development by ensuring that the conduct of the public appeals are approved by assessing their links to the needs and priorities of the counties. Mr. Speaker, you know one thing we have in this country, and not only this country, I think a lot of African, maybe it is our culture, I don't know, someone must do a research. We like to glorify poverty, Mr. Speaker. You know, I can tell you, most people, their inboxes and their phones, it starts with, hi Mheshimiwa, I am a single mother, my background is I was raised in the slums, blah, blah, blah. Yes, there is a majority. But we glorify poverty to the extent that it's not fancy if you are making it in life. It's not fun, it's not a good thing if you are independent. So the fact that we have literally mainstreamed glorifying poverty, not poverty, but we've mainstreamed glorifying poverty. It's like there has to be a story of poverty in your life, and then we will look at you and say, okay, now you're a leader. The fact that we have glorified that poverty has actually further pushed that bad culture of dependency. And when you every single time talk to someone and say, but don't you think if this particular service was made efficient, but you know, some of us, we can't, they'll always find a reason. I'll give you an example. Recently, I went to Mama Lucy Hospital, and on a charitable initiative. And when I say charitable, again, Harambe, Nyayo. On a charitable initiative. And, you know, and I also wanted to understand what was happening in Mama Lucy because we've had a lot of complaints. So, you know, I went around, looked at the wards. I could see definitely we have an issue with infrastructure. And I had baby blankets to give out to the newborns. And at least on 3 separate occasions when I was engaging the mothers to the beneficiaries of those blankets. And one of them said, and you have not brought for us, you've brought blankets and you've brought sanitary pads, but me, I have not gotten diapers. And you know, I had to say, okay, diapers were taken to the wing where we had about 17 abandoned babies and blah, blah, blah. And on another occasion, you give this and that, and they say, but you have not brought ABCD. And on several occasions, someone said, yeah, but you could have given us also 2,500, at least 3,000. Give us something. And I asked, do you have a pending bill? Do you have something, you know, is it that you have to pay? Isn't Linda Mama working? Say, oh, no, that service is free. But since you're giving, and I mean, you've come with a blanket and you've come with this, and you might as well also give money. And so that you understand how that culture is born, it's not like, thank you so much for this. It's like, give me more and give me more. And I want to say, this bill is not about politicians who are misbehaving. This bill is about every single Kenyan who is misbehaving. Because I've told you, Mr. Speaker, politicians misbehave by ensuring that they are the ones who are contributing the most to show off. But not only do they misbehave on that nature, but it pushes on corrupt activities so that they can be able to fuel all their weekend harambes. But we've seen individuals in households misbehaving. I've told you, we are going to visit a neighbor, they open a WhatsApp group collect. People have killed their parents who are still alive just so they can run harambes. People have actually run harambes stating that their children are sick, yet their children are not sick, just so they can run harambes and benefit. It's a whole industry, Mr. Speaker. And because of that bad behavior and bad culture of Kenyans, from leadership to the bottom, Mr. Speaker, I want to fully support this bill because it's time that we tell each other the truth. And the truth is, as I conclude, harambe nyayo, the spirit of dependency. That is where this came from. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Agnes Kavindu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. I want to first of all start by saying that I don't support this bill. And the reasons why I don't support it, or I will not even support it, is because we, from our forefathers, this nation was built through Harambee. And Mr. Speaker, there are three very important Harambees that people do or people conduct in this country. And one is fundraising for school fees. Even now, after the CDF is in place, they cannot provide school fees or bursaries for each and every child, especially those who are coming from very poor background, Mr. Speaker. And that is an Harambee that I will always go and give, and that is why I have to say no to this bill, unless the government can make the education free from ECD to university. Then I can say yes to such a bill. But as long as school fees is being paid, students are already complaining about the new system in the universities, the model of educating the students in universities. Some of them cannot even afford to pay for the hostels because the fees is very high. They are not getting the help that they were getting before, and they cannot even afford money to pay for accommodation. So they are going to college and loitering around during daytime and going to look for abandoned places to go and sleep because they cannot afford. I can never vote for this bill to continue because, Mr. Speaker, what are we telling those students who cannot afford school fees right now, and they have no food to eat, they have nowhere to sleep, and we are sleeping comfortably, and here we are making laws to continue oppressing them? Mr. Speaker, the second reason why I cannot vote yes for this bill to refuse fundraising is that most of hospital bills, the patients who have hospital bills and cannot afford, we've seen them actually being made prisoners in hospitals, even government hospitals. Mr. Speaker, I cannot tell you how many times I have walked into Machakos hospitals, level 4, level 5, level 3, and found patients being detained for lack of payments for their bills. Mr. Speaker, some of them, even if they are put in that hospital for a whole year, they can never pay. And the hospital, maybe the governors also have bills to put up, so they retain them. Mr. Speaker, unless medical health care has been made free in this country, I can never vote yes for such a bill, because I know there are people who are really suffering. Some of them even die, and they cannot even take their dead people to go and bury because they have bills in hospitals, not only in government hospitals, even also in private hospitals. Mr. Speaker, this is a bill we cannot be talking about right now. Kenya is not yet there. We are yet to be there, but we are not yet there. Mr. Speaker, the third kind of a bill that will make me not vote yes for this bill. And Mr. Speaker, dealing with the hospital, SHA is not working completely. It's not working. The other day I was called by one of my coordinators telling me that she was admitted in hospital and she has been discharged. And when they entered the SHA whatever number, SHA reported back to them that she has to remain in the hospital for the next 5 days for her to be discharged. And she's not on any treatment. I had to call the NSSF people, NHIF people, to ask them, why is somebody being detained in the hospital after they have been discharged by the medics? And that is when she was released. SHA is not working, and this is the wrong time to bring such a bill. If there is any bill that we should be bringing here and discussing here now, is a bill to know how to regulate SHA to make it work and function properly. Because even private hospitals now are not admitting, they are not accepting anybody with these cards of SHA unless they pay cash deposit. Mr. Speaker, we have a big problem in this country. And if there is anything we should be discussing here this afternoon, is how to solve those problems. First of all, make education free from ECD to university. 2, make health care free, especially in government hospitals. And 3, Mr. Speaker, churches have no money to build churches, even mosques. Well-wishers build mosques. And Mr. Speaker, you're a Muslim. You know very well, no, what do you call your pastors? Imam, yeah. There is no imam who can build, who can build a mosque. They have to depend on well-wishers to build mosques for them, as well as pastors. Pastors depend on the congregation and well-wishers to build churches. And Mr. Speaker, let me detach myself completely from this, because the Bible tells me you can never touch the apple of the eye of God. If we touch the church, then we'll be fighting with God. And I'm sure there is no one particular man, there is no one particular kingdom who can fight with God. So, because we build churches through fundraising, Mr. Speaker, I will say no to this bill. Unless we allocate funds for the churches to be doing their developments through the government. If the government allocates funds for the church, then we can talk about such a bill, but not at this time. Mr. Speaker, fundraising for this country cannot be stopped at the moment. And if there are people who are misusing the fundraising to go and clean their monies or to go and give out a lot of money, why can the ESCC follow such people and know where they are getting this money from? And also KRA, follow this money and know if this money has been taxed. Why punish the people who should gain from Harambee and fundraise than punishing the people who are bringing such money in churches and in people who need this money? Mr. Speaker, it is true we have seen people giving out money in in like 20 million in a church, Harambee. Mr. Speaker, not one church, not two churches, different churches in one day, and they're giving such a huge amount of money. These people should be followed by ESCC, and they say where they're getting this kind of money from. Because we know their salaries, we know their capability, but where are they getting this money? If there is any bill that we should be discussing today, is about corruption, how to end corruption in this country, and not how to end Harambee. Mr. Speaker, I say no to this bill. Thank you.
Senator Odinga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand to support this bill. Mr. Speaker, not for anything else, but Mr. Speaker, the spirit of Harambee was a very, very noble spirit, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this spirit, the idea of Harambee came up as a result of a long struggle of our people to gain independence. And during those days, Mr. Speaker, the colonial authorities tried as much as possible to divide our people, to segment them into regions and into tribes so that they could continue exploiting them. And there were people who foresaw this and thought of a spirit which could unite our people in the struggle for independence. And there was the clarion call. It was started by just an old man who used to shout very hard in Harambees, in rallies, in political rallies in Kisumu, called Omolo Ngiro. He used to say, Harambee, hey, Harambee, hey, tuvute pamoja, tuvute pamoja. So when Kenyatta saw him, came for a rally in Kisumu, and so this man was saying, tuvute pamoja, Harambee, wee. So he liked the spirit and then now made it political. So when we became independent, Mr. Speaker, you can see the house. The first building which was put up by the government was called Harambee House. Even the street where it stands, where the president used to sit, is called Harambee Avenue. Mr. Speaker, this was a very, very good spirit. It was started with very noble ideas. And at independence, Mr. Speaker, people spoke of three enemies of the people of Kenya. One was poverty. The second one was illiteracy. And the third one was disease. These were the three greatest enemies. And the independent government said, we must fight to eliminate these enemies in the spirit of Harambee. Because the poverty levels in our country were very, very high. And Mr. Speaker, over the period, more than 60, 70 years now, we have not been able to deal with these enemies of our people effectively. And therefore, poverty still persists, disease still persists, illiteracy, that is problems in education, still persist. And that is the reason why people are very passionate about Harambees. We are fighting, we are defending Harambees because we have been unable, as by successive governments have been unable to eliminate or to eradicate or even to reduce substantially these enemies of our people. That is disease, illiteracy, and poverty. And if you are a representative of people and you go over the weekend to your homes, the people who turn up to see you, they see you because they have medical problems, they are unable to pay school fees for their children, and some of them have problems of even feeding their families, Mr. Speaker. And this is a shame. This is a big shame to our country. And Mr. Speaker, the reason why our people remain poor, and a few people have managed to earn, to gain wealth and become so wealthy that they are able to even expose it everywhere, throw money everywhere, fly in choppers everywhere, is because we are not strictly implementing. I like this constitution of 2010. It brought rights of people. Those rights cannot be fulfilled if we are not serious with managing our resources properly. Those rights, like the right to education, like the right to life, like the right to decent living, decent housing, and so on. Those rights are in our constitution. And then there's chapter 6, dealing with leadership, because corruption is normally done by the leadership of the country. Mr. Speaker, the leadership of the country are the ones who expose this excessive opulence in public, and then, therefore, the public anger grows slowly, until it comes to a point of explosion. That is what you people saw here in what was called Gen Z movement, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the reason why I support this bill is because the way Harambes have been managed is not right, Mr. Speaker. It is not right even for our own people. These Harambes have been harmful to our people. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, when I was a member of parliament and I was managing CDF, when you manage CDF and you go to a school to talk to a principal of the school, and you ask him, between CDF and Harambee, which one would he prefer? Any headmaster will tell you that they prefer Harambee. Because Harambee money is not audited, it is the loser money which he can use for any purpose he likes, and without regulating that money, Mr. Speaker, our people will continue to see big monies being raised in those institutions, and yet the result on the ground, the implementation is almost zero. The benefits to the people is almost zero. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you there are instances. I can give you an example of an instance when I went to my old school where I was educated, Mr. Speaker. I went there to do an Harambee because I wanted to build for them a dormitory. I found that the school is congested, the dormitories are congested, and I wanted to build a dormitory for them. And I called my friends, including Governor Orengo and so many. We flew there. Some of them came in choppers, these choppers we are talking about, and we raised money. We raised millions of money and deposited there. And we thought that I was going to continue to be raising money until we complete the project. A year and a half later, 2 years later, I was told there's nothing on the ground. And then the reason I was told is because the headmaster who was there, the principal of the school who was there when I was raising money, had already retired, and therefore there was nobody to account for the money, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also had an occasion where we raised money through CDF, I raised money through Harambee. There was money for a project of ablution block. I went with officers from the education office, from the county council, and from my office. We went there, the teacher was so embarrassed. He was showing us the same project on which Harambee had been done, CDF had paid money, even the central government had paid money through the Ministry of Education. And he was very unfortunate because I carried all these officers with me. So when we went there, the education officer was asking him, Mwalimu, I thought this was done by our money. The county councilman was also saying this was done by money from Latif. I was also saying this was done by an Harambee, and then there was also CDF. So you find so much corruption, particularly on Harambee, on the Harambee side. So the Harambee needs to be regulated. It needs to be audited, even for public institutions. We don't just have to throw money there because it is good for our people. It is not reaching our people. It is not helping. And it is very easy to mismanage that kind of money without regulation. That's why I support this. And Mr. Speaker, there is also the other aspect of this where we need to regulate these Harambes. Because, Mr. Speaker, when you go to a public officer who is supposed to offer free service to the people, you go there as a chief, you find that a chief is supposed to give you a permit, free burial permit for your dead, and you are bereaved, supposed to give you a permit free. He has an Harambee book for his home church, which he has kept here. So when you give him your case, it is a land case or dispute or something like that, he produces that and he says, but Mheshimiwa, I also have a small Harambee for my church. Can you please give me something small for this Harambee? And this is something which you are not giving voluntarily because you want to give him for Harambee. You are giving him because you need him to give you that service which he is supposed to be giving you for free, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, therefore, the public officers must be regulated. Public officers include us. And Mr. Speaker, I support the spirit that public officers should not be allowed to be guest of honors in Harambees. They should go to Harambee and contribute their own money. They should not go to Harambee that me and my friends. Who are those your friends? We don't know how you got those friends. I mean, why don't you ask your friends also to contribute directly to those Harambees? Why are you coming there to say, me and my friends? Just go to an Harambee. And Mr. Speaker, the idea that, you know, the source of money are the elected leaders, that they are the ones with, they are the ones with money, and whenever you even go to pray in a church, you know, a small Harambee will be created for you. But Mr. Speaker, me, I don't like this. I think public officers should be banned from being guest of honors in Harambees. They should participate in Harambees. Harambees should not be banned, should not be regulated. This idea of permit, I don't like. But Mr. Speaker, the public officers to go to be guest of honors, and therefore they come there with huge sacks of money that they have been given by their friends, their friends. Let them come to Harambees and contribute their own money. And Mr. Speaker, this is something practical. When I was an assistant minister of finance in the Kibaki regime, we were not allowed to give money in Harambees, not to be guests of honors. We were allowed to do Harambees. We could go to Harambees, you can participate in the organization, but you don't have necessarily to be the guest of honor. Let other people be guests of honors. Let even maybe your competitor be a guest of honor. It doesn't matter. He can give so much money, but it doesn't mean that he is going to be elected. When the elections are nearing, maybe those Harambees can be stopped a little for 6 months or for some months, but there should be no restriction. I mean, there should be restriction in making public officers guests of honors and also bringing monies from their friends. They should bring their own contributions to those Harambees. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to say much more on this, but I support that Harambees should be there. There should not be licensing for them. I don't like the idea of the CEC or the CEC at the county level issuing permits, or the cabinet secretary at the national level issuing permits, but we should have a law which regulates public officers, and they can be taken to court for doing what they are not supposed to do. This question of permits is taking us back to bureaucracy. It is taking us back to, you know, creating some monsters. It is taking us back to the days we had left long time ago, Mr. Speaker, where the permit issue made the DCs so powerful that we had to go to the offices to line up for licensing, and sometimes just because he doesn't like you, he refuses to give you and he gives somebody else, or he is supporting somebody else and is not supporting you in an election. So he thinks that you are, if you do an Arambi, you are going to have some advantage over the opponent whom he supports, and he just refuses to give you license. So this issue of creating those kind of monsters, Mr. Speaker, I don't like, but I support the bill, and I hope that when it comes to the third reading or to committee of the whole House, we are going to tax it and make necessary amendments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Hilary Sigei.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to also, in one hand, support the bill, on the other hand, make several proposals to amend it so that it fits the purpose. Listening to the Honorable Senator Oburu, one is made to understand the importance and the history of fundraisings. He has graphically explained or run us through how it all happened, when it happened, the parties that were involved. And I believe out of the experience that he saw with the first president of this country and the experience that he's had over time, Mr. Speaker, we cannot overstate the importance of Harambes. Mr. Speaker, as that is the position in terms of its importance, regulating it is where the problem comes in. The bill in itself, Mr. Speaker, is a bill that has got objectives which have been laid out to include a regulatory mechanism for purposes of ensuring that at the national level and the county level, we are able to regulate how we conduct fundraisings, how we conduct Harambes, and appeals for whatever purpose. And it's true that we have got various kinds of Harambes. We've got fundraisings which are desired to support those who have got medical bills and are unable to meet, and they do not have insurance, or they are unable to even get the insurance they do have to serve the entire bill as it is. Secondly, there are fundraisings for school, there are fundraisings for churches, and there are fundraisings for purposes of public development in some of public projects. Mr. Speaker, we cannot say we do not need to regulate, because a regulatory mechanism will help us on how to do it, who to do it, and including the aspect on the participation by public officers. Mr. Speaker, this bill still talks about issuance of licenses and permits for purposes of this particular fundraising. And I'll come to that in a short while, Mr. Speaker, when I'm making specific reference to the relevant clauses that speaks to that. But of importance is the objective that the bill seeks to enhance transparency and accountability in terms of how do we conduct fundraisings and how to utilize the resources or the funds that we collect in the course of a public appeal in an Harambe. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, the regulation on the conduct of public or state officers in the process of planning and conducting a public appeal. Those objectives plainly are very critical. They are important. They are good because they help to streamline fundraisings. But the provisions of the bill, Mr. Speaker, as they are put, particularly under Part 2, on the regulation of fundraising appeals, where the Cabinet Secretary and the County Executive Committee member in charge of planning and social services in our respective counties are given the mandate under Clause 4, Clause 4(1)(c), to receive, vet, process applications, and issue permits. Mr. Speaker, when you run through the entire provisions of that particular clause, it will not serve the purpose of being a regulatory mechanism. Why? Because, Mr. Speaker, we, the other day here, had issues with the absence of the cabinet secretaries who were unable to attend the House to come and respond to very critical national issues. This cannot be one of those things that we would wish to burden a cabinet secretary or a CEC member to be the person to vet applications for purposes of fundraisings. We are representatives of the people, Mr. Speaker, from where we come from. And every other weekend when we get home, you get not less than 50 cards asking you to support fundraisings, whether it's for school, for medical, burials, and it is because of the inadequacy and the capacity of very many of our people whom we represent unable to pay school fees and the rest of those other types of fundraisings that they are appealing. If we then say that we will be expecting a CEC member or a cabinet secretary for that purpose to grant a permit, we will never at any given time be able to do the mainstream work of a CS. The basic thing that they'll be doing every morning is to look at the applications before their desk and approve or reject. Mr. Speaker, the provisions under Part 2 in terms of having the CS to be the person involved in receiving, vetting, processing, and approval and issuance of these permits is supposed to be deleted. In fact, I would propose that we must get permits, which I don't think is necessary for purposes of regulation. This must be decentralized to the lowest level in the administration of the national government, that is the chief. Because in my county, for example, in my ward, Nyangore's ward in itself, in every village, I can confirm to you, Mr. Speaker, that every day we have got a fundraising in every village, and you can imagine an entire county where we are asking the CS to be approving. That entire provision I propose, Mr. Speaker, should be deleted. And not because of the numbers of the applications again, Mr. Speaker. When you look at the provisions of Clause 5, the CS is expected to prepare. This is actually what the bill says. The Cabinet Secretary shall not later than 3 months at the end of each financial year prepare and submit for tabling before Parliament a report containing information including a comprehensive statement of the purpose of the appeals. This is asking the CS to come to this House to tell us of all the applications for appeals on fundraisings. One was about school fees. Another one was about an expectant mother who was unable to pay her bills in hospital. The third one was about a school-going child who needed to go abroad. It can't be one of the things that we would want the law to provide for. Similarly, the CEC is expected to do the same thing. And such a provision, Mr. Speaker, is what I would call over legislation. We don't need to have this. That I propose should be deleted, even if we are desiring to legislate and regulate fundraisings. Mr. Speaker, Clause 7 is where it provides for the role of the CEC in terms of submitting annual reports also to the County Assembly. In this case, the same concerns and the same requirements that they are supposed to do is not one of those things that we should burden the office of the CEC to engage in submitting before the Assembly such reports every financial year. Clause 11, Mr. Speaker, provides for exemptions to this regulation. And I'm glad that the Act or the bill itself has provided for instances where no regulation will be required. And first of all, this is where we are looking at where other statutes have provided, including Betting, Lotteries, and Gaming Act, that provides for instances where a member of the public or a player or an agent is entitled to do soliciting of funds, and also for purposes of the construction of, this is what 11B says, money or property collected by or under the authority of a recognized representative of a religious association registered under the Societies Act for normal collections such as tithes and offerings, or the purpose of carrying out developments or projects for the benefit of the association. This is one of those very critical support base that fundraisings help our churches. A good number of us represent local churches in our various areas of representation. No church can develop and build itself without the support of members of the public and members of that church. In fact, Mr. Speaker, they do what they normally call merry-go-rounds. We fundraise for Church A today, we fundraise for Church B tomorrow, we do the third charge, and the merry-go-round, the process goes on and on until such a time that all the churches have developed their infrastructure to do the service delivery to their people. This exemption is important, and I know where most of the churches, back where we come from, struggle to construct even the smallest of the structure without Harambes and without the support of the members. And this provision is very critical, and I support such an introduction of the exemption to the construction of churches and those under other statutes they are provided. Under, Mr. Speaker, the provisions of clause 12.3, where it requires that an individual who seeks to fundraise can or is required to make an application to the Cabinet Secretary or the respective CEC member to be registered as an entity for purposes of fundraising. I have a problem with this, Mr. Speaker. We need to regulate, but we leave it open for the people who are in need at that particular time to apply for that permit or license to conduct a fundraising. It is not proper to create an entity whose business will be to be the one getting the licenses and undertaking public collection. This way, Mr. Speaker, will become another business enterprise where people will register themselves as public collection entities for purposes of fundraising, and of course, out of that fundraising, they make money out of it. I propose that this particular provision under 12.3 be deleted so that the only people who can at any given time be allowed to apply for and get permits to regulate a process of fundraising are those who are in need, and not an entity whose business will purely be to collect fundraising in either a public or actually it's called public collection entity. I propose that that should be deleted. And if it's deleted, Mr. Speaker, the preceding provisions will become superfluous. Mr. Speaker, under clause 13, the clause provides that a state officer or an appointed public officer shall not participate in a fundraising appeal or conduct a public fundraising appeal during his or her term as a state officer. In this case, Mr. Speaker, I would propose that this is amended to read that such a public officer or a state officer should not become a chief guest or the person collecting, but otherwise in their individual capacities, because I wear several hats. I am a public or state officer when I'm in office. When I'm out of office, though I am still holding that particular office, there are certain personal, private engagements that one can engage in. So I would propose that the law reads that you cannot be a chief, not chief agent, but a chief guest, but can participate in contributing to that particular fundraising that has already been authorized. But then again, the requirement that you cannot do so within a period of 3 years preceding a general election tells us that all of us who've been engaged in these support programs called fundraisings have already committed offenses if this will be, of course I know it will not act retrospectively, but it will affect a very long period of time. And I propose that, as one member here has already proposed, let's limit it to 6 months before a general election rather than 3 years before a general election. And the provision on the penalty being 5 million, Mr. Speaker, is a bit punitive, because the cost with which an individual is contributing to a fundraising is to support a very genuine cause that, as a matter of fact, has already been approved by the issuance of that license. It cannot therefore be very fair that the same license that permitted contributions to that fundraising can lead to an individual being penalized to pay 5 million or a fine not exceeding 5 million. This, Mr. Speaker, I propose that it can be reduced to an amount which is not punitive and which is not 5 million and above. Mr. Speaker, at the same time, subclause 4 says this will become or will constitute an election offense. If it's an election offense, it attracts another separate penalty One could be bad, or one could be punished by a fine imposition because they are candidates. That way, it means one is going to be subjected to double jeopardy. Clause 14 to Mr. Speaker says that the Cabinet Secretary, upon receiving an application, has got 14 days to either make a decision to issue or not to issue. 14 days, Mr. Speaker, cannot fly, especially where we require fundraisings to be conducted for purposes of emergencies. Although I'm aware that the provisions of, I think, section clause 16 says that there are exceptions to this 14-day period, I can bet, as a matter of fact, that not such exceptions will be able to facilitate quick approval of requests for fundraising, and therefore this should be an instant application, not to the CS, as I've proposed that the requirement to have the CS take charge be deleted and have it within the local lowest level of national government administration, that is the local area assistant chief, and that application should be instant, should not require 14 days for approval, because what the next provision is asking is the list of the things that you are supposed to submit in the application. Mr. Speaker, you cannot, for purposes of an emergency, be required to list why you are supposed to do it, yet it is obviously one of the things that is seeking the support of the public to support. Mr. Speaker, clause 15 provides that this is where the CS is now given exemption, and I propose that that provision of 14 days be deleted, and also then the requirement that you will be able to get it on exceptional circumstances will not apply. Where the CS we are looking at 14 days on the application, and as clause 19 says that the CS can, and under the provisions of this act, may subject to another additional 10 days. So we're looking at almost 24 days within which one can get a permit to conduct a fundraising, which is quite unreasonable in the circumstances. Mr. Speaker, lastly, the provisions of clause 27 on keeping of the register of permitted fundraising appeals at the national level and the county level. Mr. Speaker, this is going not to be something possibly implementable. We cannot be in a position to keep the register of all fundraisings in the country, because clause 27 says the CS or the CEC shall keep and maintain a register of all persons whose permits have been issued to conduct fundraising, those who applied and were cancelled, and those and any other such particular as may be necessary. Mr. Speaker, this is a superfluous provision. We should not have this in law, and I propose that that entire clause is deleted. And Mr. Speaker, lastly, under clause 36, where it is seeking a declaration of the source of contribution. Mr. Speaker, by the time I'm proceeding to make a contribution in a fundraiser, the law here under clause 36 requires me to make, it says that a person who makes a contribution to a fundraising appeal shall specify the source of the contribution. It doesn't tell us who are we going to make this declaration to, and also it is not going to be possible to make this because in any fundraising, we don't list down the names of the people who come in to support. Everybody just bring in their support, their contribution. It is not going to be possible to implement this, and this is an unnecessary provision which I propose that it should be deleted. And lastly, the requirement that if I am receiving donations on behalf of a minor, I am required to file it, or rather to declare it as such contribution under the income tax. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of a fundraiser is to serve a good cause. It is not meant to be my funds. It's meant to support the particular cause whose permit was granted. And such a requirement also in law will make it extremely impossible to even engage in supporting and receiving on behalf of those minors or those who are unable to fundraise but need support from well-wishers. So, Mr. Speaker, as much as I support this bill, there is a lot that needs to be done to amend so that it aligns it with what is the reality on the ground with regards to regulation. But the bottom line is, it is important for purposes of regulating fundraising to avoid misuse, to avoid corruption, and to avoid, Mr. Speaker, also blackmail, because almost all the members here on a daily basis are invited to various WhatsApp groups for purposes of fundraisings, and we need to regulate that. Mr. Speaker, I support and I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tabitha Mutinda.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I rise to give my submissions on this bill, I've really tried to ask myself so many questions in terms of what is this bill really curing, Mr. Speaker? What are we really trying to achieve? Looking at both sides of the coin, as far as the issues of fundraising, or harambes as we locally call them, are concerned. Mr. Speaker, you will agree with me, and my colleagues who've spoken earlier before me, that the major reasons that have been there mostly for us being able to conduct this fundraising are for purposes mostly of helping. And in most cases, fundraising is voluntarily. It's a case of willing buyer, willing seller. But Mr. Speaker, what does it really focus on? It focuses on issues, mostly education issues, where people are doing harambes for education matters, medical issues, funeral issues, and such alike. And also, where we've publicly build public infrastructures. Public infrastructures range from mostly the schools and narrowing it down to our churches. But as far as building churches are concerned, Mr. Speaker, even the Bible says that the church shall be built by the people. And as Christians, we've done that very well. But I'm happy this bill does not really touch so much when it comes to the issue of the church. It does not really affect the issues of tithe or any contributions as far as churches are concerned, because the Bible is very clear that it is us to build the churches. It is us to build the mosques, and that has taken place. Mr. Speaker, allow me to refer to the Bible. And Proverbs 19:17 says, "Whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his deed." Mr. Speaker, further, Proverbs 22:9 says, "The generous will themselves be blessed, for they will share their food with the poor. Whoever oppresses the poor to increase his own wealth or gives to the rich will only come to poverty." Matters giving, Mr. Speaker, generously, go to or are in the Bible, Mr. Speaker. So, when it comes to the issue of this bill and what it has looked at, it has touched on an additional responsibility to the Cabinet Secretary. Mr. Speaker, this week, not just this week actually, yesterday, we had two CSs who were supposed to appear before this House to be able to answer to a number of questions that have really been there for us, are waiting for them to respond. And unfortunately, they were not able to appear before this House. From the time this House approved in our standing orders that CSS should appear, the Minister for Finance was able to appear for the first time from last year when we started this. So you can imagine subjecting the minister, the CS, to more responsibility as far as the issue of Harambe is concerned. Now, just random statistics, you would agree with me, Mr. Speaker, that if I'm not wrong, or I don't have the exact number, but we might not be having less than even 2,000 Harambes right now as we speak, going on in this country because of the different issues that are there. And if it's lower, maybe even 1,500, Mr. Speaker. So you tell me the time that the CS will have, one, to vet all this with all the necessary requirements that have been stated before this bill to ensure timely response within the duration that has been given, Mr. Speaker, the 14 days that have been stipulated. Will it be enough, putting in mind just in a day, how many applications can be? Why are we still giving more responsibility to the ministry instead of focusing on the CS, giving us the audit reports in regards to the issues, matters, public debt, how much and how we intend to collect more revenue. At the same time, timely disbursements of the funds to the counties as required, Mr. Speaker. That is where the focus should be. So bringing in the issue of fundraising and adding more responsibility to the minister is uncalled for. Actually, the best person in most cases, since we have what we call nyumba kumi, and also we have our chiefs at the mashinani lower level, they would be the best people to try and engage, as they normally give permits for gatherings to take place. Then maybe in one way or the other, they would be in a better place because they are actually much more confined within the environments of where this Harambee is supposed to take place. And they're in a better place to understand what really is the Harambee for. Because as I've said earlier, most of these Harambees are mostly for medical, education, funerals, and the like, or building a community infrastructure that will be able to help the people. So there would be better place than just coming. You can imagine someone coming all the way from Kitui, all the way to Nairobi, to submit application for permit, for Christ's sake. As much as I've seen the part where the county is involved, but seriously, where I sit in one of the committees called CPIC, where we do audit, Mr. Speaker, we are struggling with late submissions of even documents that then are not able to help in the conclusions on audit. Then when you ask the members of the county through the executive, they keep on telling you, you know, give us more time, this was the issue, or it has been submitted but late submission. Now, look at what we still want to make them do. But what is important at the end of the day, what are we trying to solve, Mr. Speaker? What is that one or two things that we are trying to cure today as far as these fundraisings are concerned, Mr. Speaker? Is it the issue of money laundering? Is that what we want to get to the bottom of? Then how do you deal with that, Mr. Speaker? We have government agencies. The EACC is there, and other government agencies, to be able to embark and look at these matters, if that is what they're trying to cure. What are we really trying to cure? Mr. Speaker, for us to cure the issues of medical, then we should give more time to the issue of SHA, so that the benefits that SHA is supposed and was supposed to provide to the people, one of them, which the president pronounced himself, was to be able to reduce the issues of Harambee, because the medical scheme should be able to cut across most of these chronic diseases that make our people end up incurring very high treatment costs. The solution for medical issues, come Harambees, then is in SHA and should be in SHA. The discussion should be the speed up of ensuring people register and the system is rolled out maximally, as we've seen in counties whereby this is taking place, so that when we achieve 100% registration and roll up of SHA, then we'll be able to have the benefits that SHA has introduced, especially when it comes to financial issues, Mr. Speaker. The other issue, Mr. Speaker, as far as Harambees are concerned, which personally have participated in contributions. Just the other day, this weekend, I did a contribution to a foundation of one gentleman, Meshak Mwenge, in Machakos County, with his good intentions of still helping the needy. But now, now focusing on the element of education factor, why people do Harambees for education, Mr. Speaker, The focus and the solution should be on free education in this country. So who will come and tell you, can you support my child to pursue this particular level of education? If from the lower level of education, the primary level, to the highest, which is the university level, there is free education, then we will not need to have the discussion of Harambes for education matters. On the medical issue, SHA should be able to take care. So what are we left with, Mr. Speaker? Looking at the issue of the church, it's not really dealt with in this bill. So that is taken care of. Mr. Speaker, the other issue of the mostly of these contributions and all that, they are because of the issue of the funerals, when we lose our loved ones. Mr. Speaker, culturally, and from where I come from the Eastern culture, when you lose your loved one, the culture, and as most cultures, will replicate, in most scenarios, we say, you do not bury for yourself your own person. The community, the friends, the neighbors, they help you mourn. They help you to give a decent send-off to your loved one. It's a culture that has been there. And people normally come together, they condole with you, they share with you, and help you in ensuring you just give a decent send-off. And in most scenarios, it's normally very voluntary, but comes from a culture that has been there. Now, looking at the timelines that have been set here, one of the first timelines by the CS was 14 days. And then further to that, Clause 16 has talked about the additional, the committee shall within 10 days upon receipt of the application be able to examine. Now, it moves from one body, 14 days, it goes to another committee for 10 days. Now, you've lost a loved one. Those are 24 days. Those are like 3 weeks, 3 days. And in our culture mostly, like with all due respect to the Muslim, they bury immediately. It's like almost the same day. For us as Christians, normally in most scenarios, it's like within 2 weeks. It just takes about 2 weeks. So if there's support that is needed and all these processes have to take place, then when we give us decent send-off to our loved ones, it doesn't really make sense at all, Mr. Speaker. And so what I would recommend to the majority leader, as far as this bill is concerned, Mr. Speaker, is to redraft and just do very simple amendment as far as the issue of the state officers is concerned. He's talked about the state officers not participating, yes, they can participate, but not being, the chief guest and all that, and leading this particular fundraising. In short, to step aside. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Yes, it's a good thing. So that the state officers can be able to fully concentrate on their responsibility. It is not how much I've been able to contribute versus what my opponent has been able to contribute. It's not a competition, Mr. Speaker. It doesn't give you an award at the end of the day, because this is a voluntary process, Mr. Speaker. So, but it achieves the element that the state officers can just be mandated to ensure they partake their roles without involving themselves so much with other responsibilities. I've seen it has also talked about the 3-year period, whereby if you intend to vie for a particular position, then within the 3 years before that before election time, then you should not participate in any of this fundraising. Then it is okay, Mr. Speaker, so that we can be judged not because of how much you've been able to contribute in total, but in terms of how much you are able to offer, how much you're able to do as a leader, but not how much you've been able to contribute, how many sacks you've been able to carry. It should be if you've been able to achieve your mandate and what you promised the people during the campaign time. That's where the focus should be, Mr. Speaker. So if this amendment, if the majority leader would just refocus and narrow it and target, yes, the state officers, then that would be making sense, Mr. Speaker. Lastly, as I conclude, Mr. Speaker, Clause 31 talks about not more than 5% of the targeted amount to be raised shall be utilized in defraying administrative expenses related to the fundraising. What are we doing? Like really? 10 million, 5% of 10 million, Mr. Speaker, is 500,000. So why should we contribute and still subject ourselves to more room for giving an opening that money can still, again be spent? That's why I'm looking at it like, what are we really trying to achieve? If it is to control that the state officers should be barred from fundraising, then that's a whole different thing. Does it make sense? It makes sense, so that it reduces what has been there publicly in terms of the issues that have earlier cropped up. Are we saying the state officers cannot help, cannot assist? No, it is voluntary. But we are limited, we should be limited from the public, so much public image, and you can, in one way or the other, know how to give your own contribution. Because as I read Proverbs, I clearly stated that, it is even in the Bible that giving is a blessing, Mr. Speaker. So 31 talking about another expense of 5% of the particular funds that have been contributed, I mean, it just doesn't make sense. It just needs to be narrowed so that it can be able to achieve its specific goal, Mr. Speaker. With those few and many, I do ask the move of the bill to seek further amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tabitha. I now call upon Senator Crystal Asiga.
Speaker, thank you so much. As I've been sitting and waiting to contribute to this amendment bill, I've just been trying to look back over the year of 2024 and figure out if I can calculate or remember how many fundraisers I have been requested to participate in. And to be honest, Mr. Speaker, I haven't thought of 1 week so far this year that I have not had to fundraise for one or two or multiple different types of appeals. And more recently, Mr. Speaker, just this month, it was with profound sorrow that I learned the passing of Eunice Kwindwa, formerly of Central Bank of Kenya. She died on Sunday, 3rd of November, and will be buried just this weekend on the 16th in her home county of Tana River. Mr. Speaker, Mama Eunice was the devoted wife of the late Ambassador Fares Kwindwa, EGH EBS, who actually served as Secretary to the Cabinet and Head of Public Service. She was a cherished mother of Sharuti, Kido, Olympia, Abaria, Kirongo, and Maombi. And Mr. Speaker, these 5 children are friends of mine, family friends. We lived together in Mombasa, we schooled together in Mombasa, and it pains me to have to accept that they've lost their father before, the late Ambassador Fares, and now their mother to cancer. And it was just yesterday, actually, when we sat here in this house and considered in the Committee of the Whole the Cancer Prevention Bill. So all of these things put together, and now considering this bill before us, really makes me have mixed feelings about how we're going to implement this in the fairest way possible, Mr. Speaker. And I really enjoyed your contribution, actually, Speaker, when you did so just a few minutes back. You really had a considered view of all the different clauses that you felt had to be relooked. And that's what I have also been doing. Speaker, I've been thinking about my friends, kids to Mama Eunice. And as we're considering this bill, I'm wondering how we are to, if I was to take this bill, if it was already enacted, for example, how would I speak to my friends and tell them, I'm so sorry for your loss, but before we go any further, we have to make sure that we are complying with the legislation that has been put in place, which requires you to do this, it requires you to do that, it needs licenses, it needs registrations, it needs all sorts, Mr. Speaker, as outlined in the bill. How would I start explaining that to people who are bereaved, who have lost their parents, who are now orphans? And thank God they are people who are now adults, just like I am, and they have been blessed enough to land on their feet, all 5 of them. But what if it was a family that didn't have that luxury? What if all the kids were minors, for example, and had to bury their parents or their mother this weekend? How would you ask minors to start going through all of these processes outlined in this bill? And how would that be fair to ask that of people who are grieving and tell them that there are timelines and that there are processes in which to follow? Otherwise, they will be running contrary to the law and could face fines and even jail time if they don't do so, Mr. Speaker. That's a difficult conversation. I also thought about what of the cases where people have multiple fundraisers that they're doing at the same time. For example, bringing a body home from abroad where somebody has passed away. That's one type of fundraising appeal, perhaps. Then maybe another committee within the same family is taking care of the funeral costs now in the home county of the deceased person. And maybe there is a third fundraiser because they have to think about the children of that deceased person and how they're going to go to school. So in one family, there could be multiple fundraisers which are going on concurrently. How do we deal with that through this bill? Mr. Speaker, like I said as well, how do you deal with, how does this bill deal with situations where, for example, you're looking at people who are marginalized groups? How do you ask, for example, Mr. Speaker, I know in Nakuru County I support a young lady whose mother is schizophrenic, severely so, and she's only in her early 20s, just a young girl, taking care of her mother who can't take care of herself. What if in her case, because she needs fundraising which is continuous to get medication for her mother, which is very expensive in light of schizophrenia and those kinds of intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities, which are also invisible, how do we then convince or support such a situation through this bill? I think there are several things that we haven't really considered about the real life situation of what is going on the ground. And there are some, and I do understand the objectives from the majority leader, which I read through in the preparation of my contribution, which are very noble and, to be honest, very progressive in my view. I just think that we are a democracy that isn't quite there yet because the majority of our population are still very, very needy in many, many ways. If this was Switzerland, or if this was Australia, or if this was the United States, Canada, perhaps we could think about realizing this in the best way possible, but we're not there yet. And I'm not sure that we will be helping, but I think that we might be actually hurting the situation if this bill does not really go through a lot of corrections and a lot of amendments to try and cure some of the issues that have been raised by many senators this evening. Mr. Speaker, we don't want to promote this one objective, which I see here, the culture of dependency. I'm not sure that that's a fair statement because of the kind of society we live in. We are dependent. That's just the fact. It's a reality. The majority of us, the majority of us are dependent. And we don't want this kind of bill to speak to the masses, to the public, and to say we are punishing the majority whilst trying to control the minority who may abuse harambes, who may abuse fundraising appeals. How can we justify that to the masses, which is the majority of Kenyans, Mr. Speaker? We don't want to speak or legislate from a point of privilege, is what I'm trying to say. And I fear that I'm really concerned that that's what we might be risking if we continue without heavily amending or even rethinking this entire subject matter, Mr. Speaker. I want to I want to go to some of the provisions. I'm sure people are asking themselves, do I need a permit to conduct a fundraising appeal? How would they know? Well, some of the criteria here are very, very dense. So it says that for one to conduct a public appeal fundraising or a harambe, they must obtain a permit, has been said. So a person cannot conduct a fundraising appeal unless the person has applied for and obtained a permit. And a person who intends to conduct a the fundraising appeal shall apply to the CS, as the case may be, etc. What information do they need in this application? So they'll need information around the full name and address of the person intending to conduct the fundraising appeal, the purpose of the fundraising appeal, the necessity of conducting the fundraising appeal, the date on which the fundraising is to be conducted, the names and contact details of the persons assisting in conducting the appeal. You'll need the amount intended to be raised through the appeal. You'll need the estimated expenses to be incurred in conducting the appeal, a statement regarding whether any monies have been received with respect to the matter pertaining to the fundraising appeal from any person prior to the date of the proposed fundraising appeal, the place at which the collection is intended to be made, and the expected time frame for the appeal. Mr. Speaker, just me saying that was a mouthful. I struggled even just to say all of those criteria. Now imagine somebody who is in a marginalized group or in a marginalized part of the country who has no clue about this bill. How will this reach them? Imagine those who are illiterate trying to put all this together in the midst of bereavement, being bereaved. How are they going to manage? I'm trying to think about, like I said, persons with disabilities, especially those with intellectual or severe disabilities. I'm trying to think about minors who also may need to conduct fundraising appeals for one reason or the other. I'm thinking about people who are indignant, who need to also adhere to these provisions and these criteria. And I just feel like we may be over-legislating and missing the intent of, or the spirit of a fundraiser, because we're trying to control or cure or curb corruption, as has been alluded to by some other members who have contributed. We can't cut off our nose despite our face, Mr. Speaker. It's difficult as well to continue thinking about how we are going to really realize and implement this in the best way possible, Speaker, because it will need the general public to be sold to this bill. And I should also say that I'm in the Labour and Social Welfare Committee that considered this bill, and we listened to many public participation contributions, and we went through the matrix. And a lot of it was not in support of the bill, if I'm completely honest. And I'm sure that the majority leader is aware of all this through a report that I'm sure the Labour chair has or will be making available to him. Mr. Speaker, it's not just the public individuals. We also had institutions, Council of Governors, and so on, many other stakeholders. Mr. Speaker, I want to just share a couple of these thoughts that I found quite interesting myself and powerful when I listened to them. They opposed the sweeping provisions of this bill in general, Mr. Speaker, like I said. They said that this bill, which seeks to regulate public fundraising activities, commonly known as harambes, is fundamentally flawed in its approach and its intent. Rather than address the root cause of the pervasive need for public fundraisers, the bill focuses on controlling the symptoms of systemic government failures. while they acknowledge the need for regulation in specific areas, Speaker, such as fundraising activities involving politicians, especially political aspirants and religious institutions. These citizens believe that the bill in its current form unfairly burdens ordinary citizens who rely on community support to address gaps in essential services by the government. They advocate for a more focused approach that targets the misuse of public funds and resources by those in positions of power, Mr. Speaker. Public fundraising, or harambes as we know them, have become a necessity to the failure of government institutions to provide adequate and accessible healthcare, for example, education and social services. The bill fails to address root cause of harambes, Speaker. The bill doesn't propose any solutions, they say, to reduce the reliance on harambes, nor does it acknowledge the systemic issues that necessitate these fundraisers in the first place. They say that the bill imposes additional regulatory burdens on citizens who are already struggling to meet basic needs, Mr. Speaker, by requiring permits and detailed financial records and imposing penalties for non-compliance. The government is effectively penalizing those who are forced to rely on public goodwill to survive. This is not only unjust, Mr. Speaker, but also very counterproductive. And I could not agree more when I listened to some of these views, Mr. Speaker. You are not curing one problem, but you are exacerbating another. The bill suppresses community solidarity. They told us it undermines the very fabric of our society, where communities come together to support one another in times of need. Ubuntu, Mr. Speaker. That's what African culture is about. That's what Kenyan culture is about. The resources and effort required to enforce this bill would be better spent, Speaker, on addressing the underlying issues of healthcare, of education, and social welfare. Go down to the root. Instead of policing citizens who are trying to help one another, government should strengthen public institution and infrastructure to reduce the need for such fundraising, right? We have to get to the root of the problem, not just deal with the branches and the leaves of a problem. Otherwise, we may be doing an injustice to our people who most need this particular type of community service, this type of community support through fundraisers.
Senator Crystal, you have got 5 minutes out of your time to conclude on your contribution.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I was actually going to my conclusion.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I think I've tried to make my point clear, and I hope that the spirit of this particular bill, which is, like I said earlier, very noble, it's very understandable, it does actually make practical sense and logical sense, but we have to marry the logical with the real life experience of what Kenyans are going through. Otherwise, we may be legislating and then not be able to follow through with implementation at all. And then we're going to put Kenyans, vulnerable Kenyans, in more trouble with the law when they never intended to ever be in trouble with the law in this way, Mr. Speaker. I would like to reiterate that I really do have mixed feelings about this bill, especially because I'm somebody who supports persons with disabilities in the country, and one of very few, because there's not many of us who represent PWDs in the country, and I understand the deep and complex needs that are in these households and in these families, not just for the PWDs themselves, but for their caregivers, their parents, and the communities that support them, Mr. Speaker. I think that some of these legislation that we come up with in this House and contribute to and debate on and ultimately pass or not pass, Mr. Speaker, we need to start thinking about them holistically and not from a place of privilege and say things like we're trying to reduce dependency in the country. We are dependent. It's like we're trying to say, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure when you had your children, when they were still little and they're trying to walk, Speaker, you will remember that they were struggling, they would crawl, they would try to figure out how is mom and dad walking step by step, left, right, and you would need to give them support in order for them to actually give them a hand. That is what I mean. give them a hand, give them support in order for them to get to the place where they're walking and no longer crawling. We cannot ask Kenyans to just stand up and walk. That's what this bill, I feel, is akin to. We're trying to tell Kenyans, okay, this is what's going to happen. We're going to cut or control fundraisers. You need to walk. You need to stop being dependent on well-wishers or your community. Do it yourself. Be independent. But you cannot be independent without giving people the tools and the process and the pathway to get there. You cannot miss the steps. You have to go from A to Z systematically. You cannot make people try to jump from one point to the next without any support in the middle, Mr. Speaker. I would like to end my contribution there, and not sure that I support this bill unless really there is some heavy lifting done in the amendment stage, which is going to come up next. But I do appreciate the majority leader for what he's trying to do. It is absolutely progressive, and I thank him for all of his industrious effort.
Thank you, Senator Crystal. I call upon Senator Murango James.
Asante sana, Mstahiki Spika. Mstahiki Spika, ingekuwa ni kongamano ya walalahoi, kongamano la maskini, kongamano wale tunaita mahulukutambo kwa Kiswahili, mswada kama huu haungeona mwanga. Lakini kongamano la wanaojiweza, kongamano la mandingi, kongamano la matajiri, ni rahisi sana mswada huu kupita bila shinda yote. Mstahiki Spika, sisi wote tulio hapa kama maseneta, naweza sema bila kuogopa kusema sisi si maskini. Mshahara tunao, bima ya afya tunayo. Lakini tusisahau ya kwamba chanzo kubwa ya harambee ambazo zinafanywa kule mashinani ni kwa sababu ya ukosefu wa afya, ukosefu wa karo ya shule, ama waliopatwa na msiba na hawezi hata kulipa fedha ili waweze kupewa mili yao waende wakaomboleza kwa amani. Mstahiki Spika, Waswahili wanasema aliyekupa wewe kiti ndio amenipa mimi kumbi. Aliyenipa kiti ambao nakalia leo kufanya uamuzi katika mswada ndio pia amewapa wale maskini tunaowakilisha kumbi, na kumbi ni ganda la nazi waweze kukalia. Kwa hivyo tusahau hiyo. Mambo ambayo sisi hapa tunaweza fanya bila shinda yote ndio inawatatiza kule mashinani. Na kama tutakuja kutengeneza mswada, kama tutawambomolea daraja, lazima kwanza tuwafunze kuogelea. Ni vizuri kwanza tutatue shinda zilisho ambazo ni za kiafya, tuhakikishe kwamba SHA inafanya kazi, tuhakikishe kwamba malipo ya shuleni kuanzia chekechea mpaka chuo kikuu hayamo, na najua ya kwamba hakuna atakaye tusumbua na mambo ya kutoa fedha katika harambee. Mstahiki Spika, kutoa, Mswahili usema kutoa ni moyo, usambe ni utajiri. Hakuna anayelazimishwa kwenda kutoa. Mtu hutoa kwa hiari yake. Swali nauliza, mzigo ulio kichwani kwapa la kutokea ni jasho. Kama sijalazimishwa mimi kutoa fedha, kwa nini nianze kutengeneza sheria ya pesa ambayo inatolewa na mtu ambaye anatoa kwa hiari? Mstahiki Spika, matatizo ambayo yako hapa yanamkumba sana mwananchi wa kawaida. Na siku ambayo mbu anatua katika sehemu nyeti, siku hiyo ndio mtu hujua sio kila tatizo huwa linatatuliwa kwa fimbo. Sio kila tatizo utatuliwa kwa nyundo. Hii shinda ambayo tuko nayo sahihi si lazima itatuliwe kwa sheria, ni tatizo ambayo linafaa kutatuliwa kwa kuweka mambo ambayo ni ya msingi tuyaweke mbele ili wananchi waweze kuendelea. Mstahiki Spika, sheria kama hizi ndo wakati mwingine inafanyanga wananchi wajiulize kama waliweka chui zizini. Na unajua sana sana tunapoomba viti, wanaotushikilia ngazi ni wale wananchi wa kawaida. Na unajua mtu ambaye anahusika katika kupandisha wengine ngazi upigwa teke menoni, kwa sababu mwenye anamshikilia anaenda juu, miguu iko chini. Kwa hivyo ni rahisi sana kumpiga teke kwa meno. Kwa hivyo ndo ningesema ya kwamba mimi kama seneta wa Kirinyaga nikikaa katika vimbaraza, wale wanaokalia kumbi, wale wanakalia vigogo kule, venye wanaongea na shinda walio nazo, mimi nitakuwa ni kama mtu wa kuwapiga teke menoni nikisema kwamba huu mswada unafaa kwa wakati tulio nao saa hii. Mstahiki Spika, mambo ambayo mimi nimeyapitia na wengi ambao wanakaa katika bunge la Seneti, naweza kudhihirisha kwamba wanaoketi hapa wengi walipita na kusoma kwa sababu watu walika hapa pamoja katika harambee wakawachangia pesa. Kwa hivyo ile njia ambayo iliwapitisha kuwafanya walio siku ya leo, mimi ningeomba tusinje tukafunga ile njia. Kwa nini Mstahiki Spika? Angalia mtu ambaye aliofiwa kwa sababu ya kukosa matibabu. Amefungiwa mwili katika makafani katika zile kakatusi zetu. Yule mtu ana pesa ya kutoa. Kwanza aliyeenda labda mwenda zake ameenda kwa sababu ya ukosefu wa matibabu. Kwa hivyo kama tungerainisha maneno na mambo matibabu inafatikana, pia tutazuilia zile vifo, na niyo kusema kwamba hakuna mtu atakuwa na haja ya kutolewa pesa. Ukiangalia tena, najua hata umechangia sana wanafunzi wanaosoma kwa sababu ya basari. Tumeongea sana na kuna miswanda. Tukianza na mswanda ambao utafanya elimu kutoka chekechea mpaka chuo kikuu, elimu iwe ni ya bure, hakuna malipo. Hakuna mtu atatuita kwenda kuchanga ili watoto waweze kupata pesa kwenda shuleni. Kwa nini tusianze na kufanya haki kwa kwanza kutengeneza zile sheria ambazo nimetaja hapo? Mstahiki Spika, kule kwa tunasema mula na kinjiko hajui mwenye anakula na mikono huwa anachomeka. Mimi ningeomba sisi ambao tumenufaika, sisi ambao tuko na bima, sisi ambao hatuna matatizo, sisi wengine ambao hatutaki kuchangiwa, kwanza tusisahau kwamba wanaoitisha msaada wako na shinda ambao wanafaa kusaidiwa. Mstahiki Spika, nitamalizia kwa kusema ya kwamba nilipokuwa nimeketi hapa, pia mimi nimepata ujumbe mfupi na sio moja ama mbili kwa watu ambao wanaitisha msaada kupitia njia za harambee. Ukiangalia wale wanaoitisha msaada wote wako na sababu ya kutosha kuitisha msaada ili waweze kuokolewa. Kwa hivyo mimi kama seneta wa Kirinyaga ningesema ya kwamba kwa sababu ya mahurukutambu ambao wametoka kule Kirinyaga na Kenya nzima, kwa wale wote ambao nimeongea nao, wale wanaoketi katika vimbaraza kuongea shinda zao na kutuita sisi tuende tukawape msaada, kwa ajili ya wale wa mama na wale wamejiunga vikundi katika sehemu za Kirinyaga, wengine vikundi zinaitwa udheri ambao zinachangisha pesa kwa wale ambao wamekufa waweza kusaidiana, nitasema kwamba mimi sitaunga mkono mswada ulio mbele yetu. Asante sana Mstahiki Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Murangwa. Senator Mohamed Abdallah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to oppose this motion, this bill. Mr. Speaker, Kenyans do fundraising not for fun. They fundraise for a purpose. And nobody likes to fundraise. It is not a very simple task. It's a very hard task, very challenging. But people go through it because they need to do that. And if we are coming with such a bill to suppress Kenyans, Kenyans are already suppressed in many ways. And if we continue to suppress them, even if I'm not doing fundraising, to cater for their needs, this is one thing which is not really fair we're not being fair to Kenyans. As legislators, we need to think twice before we pass this bill. Mr. Speaker, fundraising is not a sin. It is being done by everybody worldwide. Even politicians in America, anywhere they do fundraising. But I know this is one way of the government wanting to suppress more so the politicians not to do fundraising because they have enough money for their campaigns and everything. So they want to suppress others who wish to fundraise for their politics. Mr. Speaker, but if you want to punish one person, you don't punish the whole country or everybody. You should come out clearly and do what you think you want to do, but not punish the poor Kenyans who are fundraising for a really good purpose. I wonder how many Kenyans have access to the CS who would go and get the permits for their burials. I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, there would be queues and bodies rotting in mortuaries because they have no permits to fundraise, to take their bodies for burial. Because we know most of Christians, well, I'm a Muslim, I know we bury within 24 hours. But Christians, they have to fundraise to take their bodies to their areas where they come from for their burials. You can imagine 14 days to do to apply for the permit, another 10 days for one to think about it. That is already a month. The body is rotting in the mortuary, the bill is piling. Yeah? That is actually another way of punishing Kenyans, Mr. Speaker. And again, on the cancellation bit, you might get that permit, do all the preparations, spend quite an amount of money for those preparations, and somebody just decide and wake up and cancel that permit. And once the permit is canceled, you have to stop everything, and that fundraising has to stop. Really, are we being fair to Kenyans by passing this bill? I don't have much, Mr. Speaker, but I want to say that the government should stop suppressing Kenyans. We have suppressed Kenyans enough, and all these things, they go back to us as legislatures who are here making these bills, passing them, and that's why most of the time, me as a person, I don't pass these bills. I don't even contribute to them because I know most of these bills we are passing here are suppressing Kenyans, and this is one of them. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I oppose this bill, and I hope it's not going to be passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Abdallah. Before I allow Senator Karungthangwa to give his contributions, I've got a communication to make. This is a message from His Excellency the President on the nomination of Mr. Gerald Nyaoma Arita for appointment to the position of Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Kenya. Honorable Senators, I wish to report to the Senate that pursuant to Standing Order 47, I received a message from His Excellency Honorable William Ruto, PhD, CGH, President of the Republic of Kenya and Commander-in-Chief of the Kenya Defense Forces, on the nomination of Mr. Gerald Nyaoma Arita for appointment to the position of Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Kenya. The message was transmitted to the Senate via a letter reference EOP/CAB.26/4A, volume V/13, dated 11th of November 2024, by the Chief of Staff and Head of the Public Service, Mr. Felix Keikoskei, EGH. Pursuant to Standing Order 47.1 of the Senate, I shall now report the message to the Senate. You are most graciously notified that His Excellency the President has, in exercise of the prerogative vested in the head of state and government, caused the nomination of the candidate, the position of Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Kenya. In that regard, and pursuant to Section 13B of the Central Bank of Kenya Act, Cap 491 of the Laws of Kenya, we submit to both Houses of Parliament the presidential nomination of Mr. Gerald Nyaoma Arita for appointment as the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Kenya. To aid Parliament in its consideration and approval processes, we convey herewith the Certificate of Presidential Nomination, number 6 of 2024, alongside the nominees' curriculum vitae and testimonials, together and the report of the Public Service Commission on the recruitment of the nominee. In recognition of the pivotal role played by the Central Bank of Kenya in steering the nation's monetary policy and ensuring economic stability, we humbly request that the nomination be considered with the utmost priority. End of quote. Honorable Senators, Section 13B1 of the Central Bank of Kenya Act provides that there shall be 2 deputy governors who shall be appointed by the President through a transparent and competitive process and with the approval of Parliament. In relation to this, Section 3 of the Public Appointments Parliamentary Approval Act states that, and I quote, an appointment under the Constitution or any other law for which the approval of Parliament is required shall not be met unless the appointment is approved or deemed to have been approved by Parliament in accordance with this Act. As such, therefore, Section 8 of the same Act provides that unless otherwise provided in any law, a committee shall consider a nomination and table its report in the relevant House for debate and the decision within 14 days from the date on which the notification of nomination was given in accordance with Section 5. And sub 2, at the conclusion of an approval hearing, the committee shall prepare its report on the suitability of the candidate to be appointed to the office to which the candidate has been nominated, and shall include in the report such recommendation as the committee may consider necessary. Honorable Senators, the period on the matter that is now before Parliament starts running upon the speakers of the Houses of Parliament committing the name of the nominee to the relevant committee in the Senate and in the National Assembly, respectively. Standing Order 77-1 of the Senate Standing Orders provides that upon receipt of a notification of nomination for appointment to a public office under the Constitution or any other legislation which requires approval by the Senate, the nomination shall stand committed to the relevant standing committee for consideration. This being the case, the message from His Excellency the President, together with the curriculum vitae of the nominee, stands committed to the Standing Committee on Finance and Budget for approval hearing. The committee will hold the approval hearing jointly with the Departmental Committee on Finance, Planning and Trade of the National Assembly in accordance with the provisions of the Central Bank of Kenya Act, the Public Appointments Parliamentary Approval Act, and the standing orders of the Houses of Parliament. Part 26, this is joint committees of Parliament of the Senate standing orders and the corresponding part of the National Assembly standing orders shall apply during the approval hearing. I direct the committees to expeditiously consider this matter and to table a report thereon, considering the remaining time before the conclusion of the third session. I thank you. Signed by the Honorable Speaker of the Senate. Honorable members, that nomination is hereby committed to the Standing Committee as directed, and I call upon Senator Karungu Thangwa to make his contributions to the bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to also weigh in this bill. Mr. Speaker, from the outset, I've tried to look and understand what this bill is trying to cure. I for sure cannot understand, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if this bill was to come the way it is, for sure I won't support it. I will oppose this bill, Mr. Speaker, because if you understand very well, the Kenyan motto is Harambee. The Kenyan motto, even from the beginning, when Mzee Jomo Kenyatta was alive, was Harambee. Harambee meaning coming together, pulling together to help each other. Mr. Speaker, if we can legislate on our motto, I think we are doing over legislation, Mr. Speaker. If we can come up with restrictions and rules against our motto, against what we believe in, then I believe we have lost it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this bill was supposed to have about 2 clauses and 2 clauses only, just to stop the state officers and public officers to engage in harambees, just to stop state officers and public officers from dishing out cash publicly, enticing people or pulling them towards their agenda, Mr. Speaker. But when you read, it's curtailing the belief of what we Kenyans have always believed. Harambees or fundraisers have built schools, have provided medical assistance to people who are very vulnerable, Mr. Speaker. We have helped families to come out of hardship. We have done harambees and fundraisers to buy someone a cow, to buy someone a boda boda, to start someone a small business. But then we are told, Mr. Speaker, for you to do that, you have to register, and when you register, you have to do that request within 14 days, or before 14 days, prior to that event, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, some of these fundraisers are emergencies, and everybody who has spoken to this has mentioned that we, the government, are supposed to make the lives of our people very easy and very, Mr. Speaker, not to make their lives harder. If you say that you need 14 days to apply to conduct a harambe, yet it's an emergency, and this emergency is caused because the Shi and Sha cards did not work, then somebody, and you know our hospitals, what they do, they say we cannot admit this person unless we have money. This person, when we get him in here, he will incur a lot of money. So we need a deposit. Mr. Speaker, very fast, if the health systems of our country were working, maybe we wouldn't be worried with this one, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Kenya, we are known to be coming together. Even the government itself, through Red Cross, has invited Kenyans to come together, to contribute, to save Kenyans because of disasters. Kenya for Kenya. Now, Mr. Speaker, if we make this harambes and fundraisers very hard to achieve, Mr. Speaker, now fundraisers will be like drugs. We will now convert the good gestures of helping each other like a drug that you are helping in hiding. Yet we, the politicians, will be able to flash our money when we are helping and call upon and take pictures so that we can get votes, Mr. Speaker. But those who do not want votes, those who are just there to help each other, we are curtailing, we are stopping them, Mr. Speaker. Why? Mr. Speaker, the reason I would oppose this bill, one, is undue restriction on charitable activities, Mr. Speaker. If you read clause 14.2, it says, a person who intends to conduct a public fundraiser appeal shall submit to the Cabinet Secretary or the respective county executive committee member, as the case may be, an application for a permit, at least, as I said, 14 days before the date of the conduct of the fundraising appeal. Mr. Speaker, someone is looking for money, and we are telling them to travel, to look for a CS, to look for a county executive. And remember, every county has one headquarter. So we are telling somebody to leave from one place to another to just go and apply, Mr. Speaker. It also says, that's why I say we are over-legislating, Mr. Speaker. We are even telling people, when you conduct your harambe, the money that you collect, the administrative monies that you are going to use, should not exceed 5% of what you are going to collect. How do I even know how much I'm going to collect, Mr. Speaker? So if people don't turn up, and I was so prepared with 1 million shillings or 500 shillings or even 10,000 shillings, and then I receive 3,000, Mr. Speaker, that becomes a crime. So I think the most important issue here, Mr. Speaker, is not to make Kenyans feel as if we are on their throats, that whenever they try to turn to help each other, we are there, Askari Wakanjo, the government, they are there telling you, I saw you guys, you had a harambe yesterday, can I have a few amounts of what you contributed yesterday, Mr. Speaker? Another issue, if you look at clause 13, clause 13, Mr. Speaker, it is infringing or an infringement on the freedom of association. Yes, I understand a state officer should not conduct harambe, but why are we stopping them from association? Can you imagine, even that state officer, because of course, not everybody is a thief, not everybody is corrupt, so probably the little money they have will not be enough to cater for some of these sudden emergencies, Mr. Speaker. Then it is your harambe, but you cannot even contribute. in your Harambee. You cannot even tell people, I'm showing you that this is the little I have come with this amount, Mr. Speaker. So sometimes, instead of infringing that freedom of association, we should come up with a way to stop the public officers, Mr. Speaker, from, but not this way, as it is stated in Clause 13. Mr. Speaker, it is also an offense for an aspiring candidate to attend a Harambee 3 years prior to the next election. Mr. Speaker, it's like we get to understand that we run, or we make a decision to run 5 years before the election, 4 years before the election. I mean, when do you make the decision to run? You can make the decision to run even tomorrow, or a few days before the end of the closure of registration, Mr. Speaker. I think this bill, as it is, Mr. Speaker, should only work on stopping the money laundering and also stopping politicians from flashing monies for the sake of wooing the voters. But we should not stop the aspiring candidates from going for this Harambee, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, we have to work on to make sure that we do not get into the privacy of people, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Karungu, just resume your seat. I want, as you conclude, to exercise the provisions of Standing Order 34.2 to extend the sittings to allow you to conclude your contribution under 5 minutes. That is pass 1 to Standing Order 34.2A.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You're the best. You're the best. I was actually about to conclude. Mr. Speaker, if you look at Section 32, Clause 32, it says that every person who conducts a fundraising appeal shall keep a record reflecting the income and expenditure relating to the appeal, including, and then it gives details there, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is an administrative burden. You're telling me that everybody who comes must write their name, must say how much they have contributed, and they must, it is even here, I don't remember which clause that says the contributor must actually declare the source of their income. Mr. Speaker, now we are scaring away the donors. We have private donors. We have people who want to help anonymously, Mr. Speaker. And then we are saying that we should write their names down. Now, who is going to keep this record? I was in Arusha the other day, Mr. Speaker. And this is, when I talk about Harambee, I was thinking only this happens in Kenya only. I was in Arusha just last week in the committee of Liaison. And as I was walking in the streets of Arusha, Mr. Speaker, a young man approached me with an exercise book that has a photo of a young guy in front of, stuck on that exercise book. And he told me, kindly help, we have lost one of our Boda Boda guys. I thought this was only unique to Kenya. This is an African spirit of helping one another, Mr. Speaker. Now, if we restrict it so much, we will only burden our people, oppress our people, and also make them feel as if Kenya does not belong to them, Mr. Speaker. And as I conclude, there is also disproportionate penalties. It is saying for a state officer who attends a Harambee, you'll be fined about 5 million Kenyan shillings, or 2 million, or 3 years in prison, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it will be proportional to how much you contribute. I mean, if I contribute 1,000 and you fine me 5 million, are you helping me in any way, Mr. Speaker? You should actually put it as if 2 times of what you contributed, or 3 times of what you contributed in that Harambee, Mr. Speaker. But when we over-fine or charge crimes, what happens is that the crime goes higher, Mr. Speaker, because now that is when the police officer will be bribed and all that, Mr. Speaker. So we should not create channels of corruption by trying to stop corruption and by trying to stop people from helping each other. So, Mr. Speaker, if the mover of this bill will not change as per what the members have said here today, I don't see this bill seeing the light of the day. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Senators, this is the late interruption of business of the House pursuant to Standing Order 34-2A. It is now 6:34 p.m. and having concluded the business for which I extended the House of sitting pursuant to Standing Order 34-2A, the Senate stands adjourned until Tuesday, 19th of November 2024 at 2:30 p.m.